The hot midday sun was scorching the motorway. There were vendors selling fruit from their gardens and dairy products, cottage cheese, sour cream, milk. Vanessa, a pretty young girl, was greedily drinking cold water from a bottle, fanning herself with a homemade fan made of newspaper and squinting against the heat. As she gazed into the distance, she noticed an expensive car stopped at the side of the road. The window opened and a beautiful blonde woman lazily asked Vanessa, "Are the apples sweet? Bring them here, I'll try them. Maybe we'll take them if we like them." The girl was shocked by such rudeness, but she restrained herself and politely replied, "Good afternoon. The apples are very tasty, juicy and sweet. Come, try them, I'll give them to you cheaply. But I'm not your servant. I'm not obliged to carry you." The maid snorted unhappily. "Why, you're touchy. Who does a country girl pretend to be? If you don't want to, you don't have to. Let's go." But her companion, surprisingly, besought the blonde, "Helen, calm down. I'll get out myself if you're so lazy and you sit in the salon." The guy came out, smiled amiably and apologized. "Good afternoon, you'll have to excuse my girlfriend. She's not in the mood today, and it's hot, so she's cranky. Let me try some." "Oh, they're really good. I'll take all of them. In our city and supermarkets, apples are impossible to eat like plastic, but yours are as sweet as honey." Vanessa was happy, put all the apples in a bag and timidly said, "Eat to your heart's content. What are you interested in? Cow's milk and cottage cheese? From the morning milking, all fresh, won't you take it?" The blonde lost her patience and started shouting from the window, "What are you doing there for so long making nice with this girl? Let's go already." I wouldn't take anything from her at all. Let her first learn how to serve customers properly. Tears glistened in Vanessa's eyes. She swallowed them, but held them back again. Gregory admired the beauty of the girl, her blonde hair, her shoulder-length braid, her long sundress, and her big, sad cornflower eyes with long lashes. He, not expecting himself, said, "And let's have both milk and cottage cheese. I'll try everything with pleasure. Here you are, no need for change. Thank you, have a good day." A happy Vanessa glowed, "Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy everything." The vendors jealously murmured, "Wow, how lucky Vanessa is. She sold all the goods in one fell swoop." The buyer didn't even haggle. That rarely happens. Vanessa packed up and walked down the dusty country road home, happy as a child. This smiling, pleasant guy was still on her mind. He caught her heart, though she realized that they would never meet again. He's a city bimbo, and she's a simple girl from the village. The girl gave her mom all the money. She was happy, because it was their main income. Now they would have something to buy groceries in the village shop. She and her mother lived together. They kept a vegetable garden and a household together. They had a cow, Zorka, chickens, geese, their own garden, where they grew fragrant apples and pears. The girl liked village life very much, and she would not agree to go to the city, although her mother persuaded her. Mole, in the village there are no prospects, as well as work. Vanessa realized it herself, but she really liked to run to the farm, to take care of the cattle, and there were no grooms here. All the wiser ones had gone to town long ago. Vanessa didn't like the guys who stayed behind. They liked to drink and were lazy to work, and yet she was afraid to move to the city herself and leave her mother alone. At that very time, a huge scandal broke out in the car. Helen shrieked, "Why did you buy that filth? Yuck. It's country milk, it's fatty. I bet it smells like cow. Or have you forgotten that I'm on a healthy diet, counting calories? Or did you like that girl? Just say so. Are you not even listening to me? I was going to marry you. You've ruined the whole day." Gregory wrinkled his nose. The shrieking was getting on his nerves. His head was rattling. He suddenly braked sharply, opened the passenger door and said menacingly, "Get out. Get out. Helen, our relationship is not going well. You yell day and night for no reason at all. I'm sick to death of it. We wanted to spend the weekend at the cottage with friends. All the people are like people, and only you are all wrong. Mosquitoes, heat, wrong words, wrong looks, fat kebab or sour wine. It's just unbearable. Now you're attached to a girl, you've offended a man for nothing. People in the countryside work hard. They're on their feet from morning. and have no time to be hysterical. And you're idle 24 hours a day. You don't know which holiday resort to go to. Maybe we should break up. If you don't like it, I don't mind." Helen gasped with anger, but she pulled herself together. She was afraid that she would indeed be dropped off on this unfamiliar country road. The girl closed the door and replied sharply, "And you're right. I don't mind either. Take me to town and we'll part. Swallow your milk and admire that hillbilly. And I'll find a better man for me. You'll regret it." When they parted, the boy was relieved. He had regretted 100 times that he had once paid attention to this glamorous beauty at a party. She'd got him so cleverly wrapped around her that he hadn't even blinked an eye. At first, Helen seemed to him stylish, self-confident, so beautifully told him that she was looking for herself, going to all sorts of courses and training. She knew how to present herself favorably, and in bed was passionate. Her parents liked Helen. After all, her father held an important post in the administration, so relatives hurried Gregory with the wedding. But the guy himself with time began to realize the true essence and became more and more disappointed in the bride. The character of Helen was simply unbearable. She drove him with constant complaints and tantrums, behaved like a capricious princess. Gregory was terrified to imagine how they would live in the future, so he was even glad that they parted. The boy still could not forget those very sad cornflower eyes of the strange girl who sold milk, and decided that he wanted to see her again. Why? He didn't understand yet, he just wanted to see her again. A week passed, followed by another. Vanessa paired up with her mum from morning till evening, spinning in the village chores. By evening, both of them fell down, unable to feel either hands or feet. At night, she dreamt of that boy Gregory, and woke up with a silly smile on her face, her heart beating so fast for some reason. She kept berating herself. What kind of stupid dreams are these? Dreams. It's clear that we'll never meet again. But it wasn't. That day, she and her mother were sitting in the gazebo, cutting fragrant pears they were going to make jam. Suddenly, there was a squeal of brakes, and the old dog Max barked hoarsely. Vanessa reluctantly went to open the door. When she saw Gregory on the doorstep, she was speechless. She even shook her head as if chasing away a vision. The guy was holding a bouquet of flowers and a huge teddy bear, stomping in place and smiling. Then timidly he said, "Hi, these are for you. I know it's stupid, but I couldn't think of anything original. I can't get over you, you know. Can I come in? We hardly know each other. I'm Gregory." The girl looked at him shocked and rubbed the teddy bear in her hands. "And I'm Vanessa. You, I've been dreaming about you too. How did you find me? I thought I'd never see you again." Gregory winked. "He who seeks will always find. The grannies who trade with you gave me the address. They also praised you so much, smart, beautiful, and hardworking. So I fell in love with you even more. What a joker you are. One time you saw me and fell in love straight away. It doesn't work like that. You have a girlfriend, that scandalous blonde." Gregory became serious and replied, "Helen and I broke up. I'm not joking. So, are you going to let me visit?" Vanessa almost jumped for joy. She took him into the yard and introduced him to her mom. "Mammy, we have guests. I want you to meet Gregory. He's the one who bought up all my goods and now he's come to visit us. And this is my mother, Mrs. Linda." The woman fixed her handkerchief and fussed. "Good afternoon, Gregory. It's so nice of you to come and visit us. Did you like our milk so much? Come on in, I'll get the table ready in a jiffy. My daughter and I were just making dumplings today, so we'll treat you. Meanwhile, tell us who you are, how do you live, what do you do? It's not often that such important people come to visit us. Our life in the countryside is simple. We get up in the dark and go to bed around midnight. And we work all day long. It takes a lot of effort to get a harvest. And you have life in the city, and I'm very curious to know what people do there." Gregory began to tell about himself. "I remember my village a little. My grandmother lived there long ago, my dad's mom. I loved to bask in the warm sunshine, and the taste of her pies can't be compared to any restaurant dishes. Then she died, the house was sold, and until recently I had never been out of town. We have a family business, a small company selling electronics and providing programming services. I have been interested in computers myself since I was a child. I graduated from university, and now I work for my father's company. Nowadays, you can't do without it. All information is on electronic media, so our business is very much in demand. I ended up in your area by accident. A friend invited me to his dacha for kebabs. I was on my way there with my friend when I saw your daughter on the motorway. And believe it or not, I disappeared. I broke up with my girlfriend, but I can't forget Vanessa. So I came here again. I'm not going to hide it. I really liked her. Can we have a little chat with her? Would you mind? Mrs. Linda waved her hand and laughed. Why should I mind? If you don't want to fool around, you're welcome. It's a young thing. I understand Vanessa doesn't even go out. She doesn't go to the club. So I'd love for her to get away for a while. But you eat your dumplings and take the sour cream. Surprisingly, Gregory felt so good at Vanessa's house. He was welcomed and fed like a dear guest. You could say what you thought, it was so rare in the city. After dinner, Vanessa, embarrassed, took her beau to the river for a swim. It was so hot that it was too hot to breathe. The girl was a little shy at first. Gregory looked at her so much. But then they somehow got closer, began to have fun and frolic in the water. For a long time they sat on the shore and talked about everything. Gregory had never had such an amazing date in his life. He kissed Vanessa gently on the cheek and whispered, "Can I come and see you again or steal you away? Go to the cinema or to a restaurant? Do you mind?" Vanessa was embarrassed and replied, "We can go to the cinema. I like romantic films about love the most. But I don't want to go to a restaurant. I have nothing to wear there. And I'm afraid I'll look like a fool. I'll take you to the wheat field next time. You know how beautiful it is there. You lie there, dreaming, looking up at the sky." And so the young people began to meet. Mrs. Linda couldn't be happy. The neighbors were burning with envy. Wow, a city prince is traveling, and he's not fussy. What a groom she's got. He's going to marry her and take her to the city. The girl did not walk, she flew. She fell head over heels in love with Gregory, bored and couldn't wait for their next meeting. 6 months flew by. Winter had already begun. Now Gregory often took his bride to town, spoilt her with gifts. He gave her a beautiful ring with stones and French perfume. But only Mrs. Linda was more and more tormented and persuaded her daughter Vanessa. "There is something wrong here. You've been dating for a long time, and your Romeo has not yet introduced you to his parents. That's not good. Maybe it's the city where they're so free. We don't do that in the country. It's about time I sent a matchmaker, or there'll be bad rumors soon. Shall I tell him directly?" The girl flared up like a match, "Mum. What are you doing? It'll turn out that we're asking for a wedding ourselves. I don't want that." "It's all right, Mammy. We love each other so much, and I'm sure that soon Gregory will invite me to his house. He's introduced me to his friends." Gregory's friends have received Vanessa surprisingly well. Yes, she was a little shy, but she was calm and cheerful, not like that insufferable Helen. Now they often went to the cinema together. Then one day they bumped into Helen head-on. Gregory wanted to pass by, but no, the former fiancée herself stopped him. "Oh, what people. Rothfuss, you haven't wasted any time. You've come to town with your country girl." And the girl was not a bad girl. She quickly realized what was going on and clung to you with all her might. It was embarrassing and hurtful. But Gregory rushed to her defense. "You don't change, I see. The venom just keeps spurting out. You'll drown yourself. And don't you dare hurt Vanessa. She's my fiancée and will be married soon." They went their separate ways. Helen thought to herself, well, shock. I wonder if his parents know that he's taken in a milkmaid. We should tell them, just in case. So Helen did, rang Gregory's mother and told her everything. That same evening, Mrs. Merrill gave Gregory a real interrogation. "Son, what's going on?" "Helen rang me and said you'd left her and were marrying some milkmaid. Is this some kind of a bad joke?" But Gregory became serious and replied, "It's true, Mum. I've fallen in love with a country girl, Vanessa. We have been together for 6 months. I intend to marry her. What's the problem? I just wanted you to meet her, because I can't wait any longer." The woman even grabbed her heart. "Will, come here. Stop watching TV. Your only son has gone mad and is marrying a milkmaid. I'm not going to survive this. I'm sick." Meryl began to roll her eyes and rub her temples. She was really starting to feel sick. Her husband waved a towel at her and shouted at his son. "Gregory, you know how to upset a family. You've made your mother have a seizure. Let's put the wedding on hold for now. We have a tax audit in the company now. Everyone is nervous." Gregory sighed. The conversation wasn't going to work. He didn't know what to do or how to face Vanessa's mother. He realized it was time to get married. In the bedroom of the Rothfuss couple, passions were boiling. They were awake, sitting like schoolboys under a blanket and hotly debating. Mrs. Merrill was saying, "Well, something has to be done. This is madness. I can't bear the embarrassment. Her relatives will come from the village and bring sausages, jars of cucumbers and lard and moonshine. Our partners won't even give us a hand after that. You must influence your son. You're a father. Scare him. Make him leave that village idiot." Will jumped up, paced back and forth across the room, thinking. Then he began to reason out loud. "You don't realize, Merrill, if you push him, he'll probably jump up. You know his temper. He won't back down. We're just going to get into a fight. No, we're going to have to be more subtle than that. I think I've got an idea. I'll organize an urgent business trip abroad tomorrow. I'll think of a reason. For a month. And during that time, we'll think of something while he's away. What do you think of my plan?" Mrs. Merrill threw herself around her husband's neck. "That's great. You're right. We can't solve this with a scandal. We've got to do it in a way that won't hurt a mosquito. And Gregory won't realize a thing. You just make sure he leaves town. And I'll see to it that I can get that country girl to forget about marrying our son." When Vanessa learned that the groom was going on an urgent business trip, she was saddened. They said a long and passionate goodbye, promising each other that they would call each other and wait. Gregory left, and the girl completely missed her beloved. The days dragged on gray and monotonous. Suddenly her phone rang. The girl was startled by what she heard. "Hello, is this Vanessa? It's Gregory's mom calling. My name is Mrs. Merrill." "Yes. This is Vanessa Lawrence. Good afternoon. Nice to meet you. We never got to meet you before Gregory left. But he promised that as soon as he got back we'd come and visit you." The woman replied in a husky voice, "You read my mind. That's why I'm calling. I want to invite you to visit. So what if my son is away? And you come on Saturday, write down the address. We'll sit down as a family, get to know each other better." The girl was so happy. "Thank you for the invitation. I'll definitely come. Goodbye." Vanessa hurried to share such stunning news with her mother. But she suddenly became serious. "It's strange, daughter. It's very strange. There is some kind of a trick here. Why would your future mother-in-law want to welcome you without Gregory? And she didn't even call me." But Vanessa wouldn't hear of it, Mom. "Don't get yourself and me worked up. I'm so happy. I'm finally going to meet Gregory's parents. That's what you wanted. But I'm so nervous. I don't even have anything to wear. Not even a decent dress." Mrs. Linda hugged her daughter. "Well, it's no trouble. I have a little money saved up. Tomorrow we'll go to town and buy you the best dress. God willing, everything will go well. I want you to be happy, my daughter." The friend made Vanessa beautifully styled, light makeup, manicure neat. The girl looked so fresh and attractive. She crossed herself and went into town. With difficulty, she found the address she was looking for. But the house shocked her. Instead of an elite mansion, there was a ruined Khrushchevka. The girl did not understand anything. Can rich people live in such a house? Everything seemed implausible. With trembling hands, she dialed the code. A hoarse and unpleasant voice answered her in the intercom. "I'll open up now. Come up." Vanessa stepped into the shabby, cigarette smoke-smelling flat and gasped when a grim, unshaven elderly man in a wheelchair wheeled up to meet her. His arms were covered in tattoos all the way up to his shoulders. It was obvious that he had spent more than 1 year behind bars. The man looked at the visitor curiously and scratched the back of his head. "Wow, what a girl I've got here. Who are you, pretty girl? What do you want here?" "I don't expect guests. If you're from a real estate agency and you're going to persuade me to sell the flat again, you can leave right away." Vanessa didn't understand. "Excuse me, I must have the wrong address. I'm not often in the city. I'm here to meet my fiance's parents, Mrs. Merrill and Mr. Will Rothfuss. I've got the address written down. 37 Zavodskaya Street, flat 5, first entrance. I must have got something mixed up. I'll go then." The man coughed and laughed warmly. Vanessa even got goosebumps. He replied, "The address is correct, but there's never been a Rothfuss here. You've been duped, that's for sure. They're probably just trying to make fun of you. Everybody knows I'm a cripple, and I'm not a social pariah. The whole neighborhood shuns me. Some fools even call me an ogre. They must have given me my address on purpose." Vanessa realized it all herself, and she felt so offended. That's how Gregory's parents had decided to humiliate her. They had arranged all this on purpose. They wanted to show that someone like her belonged only next to an invalid. The girl glanced at the dirty, long ago unwashed window. It was almost night outside. The snowstorm was blizzarding. There would be no train until morning. Where would she go now? She would have to stay at the station all night. She had already opened the door, almost went out. But the owner of the house suddenly stopped her. "Wait, wait. Where will you go at night? You are young, naive, and the streets are full of fools. Somebody will pick on you, and the weather has gone bad. It's blizzarding. Don't worry, I'm old enough to be your father. I won't lay a finger on you, and if I wanted to, I couldn't. I lost all my health in prison. You'll spend the night and go home in the morning." But Vanessa drew back in horror. "No, thank you, I'll go. To be honest, I'm afraid of you." The man only shrugged his shoulders. "It's up to you. Only it's all lies about me. I didn't rape or kill anyone. I've been accused. Though why am I justifying myself to you? Don't be afraid, silly. Do you want to call your family? Give them my name and address. Tell them you're sleeping here." It was really scary to spend the night on the street. The girl dialed her mom's number, trying to be encouraging, and lied. "Hi. Mammy. Yes, the evening went great. I'm staying here in town tonight. Write down the address and don't worry. Go to bed. I'll be there tomorrow." The man finally introduced himself. "My name is Nicholas. I'm telling you, I'm old enough to be your father. I'm in my 60s, and I'm an invalid. What's there to be afraid of? Go and put the kettle on. There's biscuits and bread on the shelf. My neighbor Dan comes to see me once a week. Thanks to him, he goes to the shop and helps me with a few things around the house." The girl shook her head. The man didn't seem so scary to her anymore. She even felt sorry for the sullen, lonely man. She couldn't sleep anyway, so they sat down to drink tea and talked. Vanessa told about herself, about her fiancé, about how her future mother-in-law had set her up. The girl sighed. "What am I supposed to do now? Call and tell Mrs. Merrill everything? But what good would that do? Or tell my fiancé? He probably wouldn't believe such a thing. Gregory loves his parents, always speaks so warmly of them. I'm so confused. I don't know how to tell my mom. I can't think why. Why did Gregory's parents do this to me? They don't even know me." The man shook his head, then advised, "I wouldn't say anything to anyone if I were you. You don't know yet who is hurting you and why. You have to wait. Time will put everything in its place. You'll see." Vanessa agreed, and then she couldn't stand it any longer and asked, "Mr. Nicholas, why do you live alone now, and with a disability? Is there no one from your family who could help you?" The man was silent for a long time. I guess he didn't really want to share his past. But then he made up his mind and began to say, "Oh, Vanessa, you ask difficult questions, you can't tell everything. I grew up in a simple village family. I have a younger sister, Linda. But it's all my own fault. I went down the wrong road. I didn't want to live in the countryside all my life, and I didn't try to study either. I finished high school and went to the city. My father expected me to be his assistant. We had such a fight when we said goodbye. I dreamed I'd be rich, that I'd have everything. At first, I really got clever. I went to work at a construction site. I rented a corner. I tried, and it seemed to work. My life was getting better. After a while, I became a foreman. I managed to buy this flat from a pensioner for cheap. But one fateful incident ruined my life. I once came late in the evening from my shift and saw 3 scoundrels molesting a girl, and she shrieked and fought back. I couldn't remember myself. I stood up for them. I can't stand it when the weaker sex is offended. So I gave her offenders a good beating. And the girl ran away while I was fighting. I didn't even ask her name. It would seem I did a good deed. I stood up for the girl's honor. I thought I was a hero. But if only I'd known how I'd get away with it. In a couple of days, I was rounded up right at the construction site and taken to the department. And there began hell, real madness. The girl wrote a statement against me, saying that it was me who attacked her. I tried to justify myself. I didn't understand what was going on. And then I was told that one of those hooligans turned out to be the governor's youngest son. So he complained to his father, and he decided to get even with me. He fabricated a case, and I was sentenced to 15 years. My parents cursed me in court, believed everything. They said that if they'd known I'd grow up to be a rapist, they'd better not have given birth to me. My sister stopped talking to me too. Well, you know what happens to rapists in prison. I prayed for death every day. That's how I broke down. On the outside, with an article like that, they'd all look away from me like a leper. I learned that my parents had moved somewhere else. They didn't even leave me an address. They simply cut me out of their lives. How could I survive it all? And I started drinking. I went downhill. And then I fell asleep drunk in winter and froze my feet off. Now I can barely walk. I'm in a wheelchair most of the time. I'm a pariah to everyone, a lowlife. Only Dan, the neighbor, is kind to me. Once I told him everything in despair, he believed me. That helps. Good soul. Now I don't drink anymore. I'm not in good health, so I'm living out my years. But to be honest, I haven't seen anything good in my life, as if I'd never lived at all. You know, Vanessa, what's my greatest wish? I haven't told anyone, but I'll tell you, it's to find my relatives and prove to them that I'm not guilty of anything, and then I can die. Vanessa felt very sorry for Mr. Nicholas. How hard is it to live with the stigma attached to you? She suddenly said, "Can you write me all the details of your relatives and sister? Also, what year were you imprisoned when all this happened? I have some free time. I can look for information on the internet. Maybe I'll get lucky. Also, can I visit you? Just to tidy up the flat. It's no trouble for me, and it's more fun for you." Mr. Nicholas almost cried. A stranger's girl giving him a helping hand like that, taking him at his word. He replied, "Thank you, Vanessa. Come round if you like. I'd be glad to have a word with anyone. Now let's go to bed. There's a cot in the corridor and clean linen in the wardrobe. Good night." The girl propped the bedroom door with a chair just in case. She was a little afraid, after all. But the night passed quietly. In the morning, she felt ashamed of her doubts. She ran to the supermarket, bought some groceries, cooked a meal for Mr. Nicholas, and only then did she say goodbye to him, promising to come back for a visit. Already on the landing, she bumped into the very same Dan. He was a young, smiling, simple guy. He was the first to say hello to her. "Good afternoon." "Oh my goodness, Mr. Nicholas has had visitors. I don't remember such a thing. Perhaps you are a relative of his? I'd be delighted, for the old man is all alone. By the way, my name is Dan." The girl introduced herself and hurriedly explained, "I'm Vanessa, and Mr. Nicholas has told me about you. He's very grateful to you for your help and involvement in his plight. I admire you too. To be honest, it's good that you don't forget the old man. But I'm not related to him. There is such a story here." They sat down on a bench in the courtyard of the house, and the girl told briefly how she had come to be Mr. Nicholas's guest, and then added, "I've written down all the details of his relatives. I want to try and find them. He's so anxious to see them. I feel sorry for him. I think I will come once a week to visit him. At first, when I saw him, I was scared. To be honest, he looked like that. But then we got to talking, and it turned out that he was just an unhappy man hurt by fate. I'd really like to help him. Oh, what am I talking about? The train's in 20 minutes. I'll be late." Dan exclaimed, "Let me give you a lift. Is it okay that I'm on a first-name basis? We're almost the same age. Listen, I was thinking, Let's share the patronage of Mr. Nicholas together. We'll exchange phone numbers, so we'll be friends. We'll call each other. Would you mind?" Vanessa held out her hand to him. "I'm all for it. Let's be friends." They got into the guy's old car and he drove her to the train station. Helen filmed the whole thing from behind the trees. She was rubbing her hands together. Her and Mrs. Merrill's plan had worked. "Well, hang on, hillbilly. You and Gregory are not getting married." When she got home, Vanessa couldn't bear to tell her mom everything. Who but she would understand and support her? She even cried on her shoulder, regretting that she'd never met Gregory's parents and lamenting that they were such mean people. She also told her about Mr. Nicholas, about his fate. Mama shook her head and comforted her daughter, saying, "Yes, the matchmakers did something wrong. After such a thing, you won't want to get married. How can you live with such people and communicate with them? Well, Gregory will come. We'll have to have a serious talk with him. He seems like a nice bloke. He's not arrogant. But we need to clear things up with his parents. In the meantime, try and stay calm. Wait for your fiancée, and then we'll see. Thank you to Mr. Nicholas. He's a stranger, but he's taken you in. Why didn't you tell me, you silly little thing, in the first place? I'd have asked Sam the farmer, paid him to bring you back. It's lucky he was a decent man, or you'd have risked so much. There aren't many fools in the world. Don't scare me like that. You're the only one I've got, sweetheart. I'm always so worried about you." In the evening, having done all the housework and eaten dinner, Vanessa finally sat down at the computer and tried to enter all the data to find any information about Mr. Nicholas's family. Half an hour later, she walked excitedly into her mother's bedroom, who was pecking her nose at the television. Vanessa asked quietly, "Mummy, are you still awake? Look what I found." Nicholas's parents were Mrs. Catherine and Mr. Andrew Pattison, and his sister's name was Linda Pattison, and they lived in the village of Prokhorovka. Strangely enough, there are no such people in this village. How can that be? I don't understand. So he lied to me? And then I looked closer. His parents' names were the same as my grandparents'. His sister's name, year of birth, even the date. Only his surname is different. We are Schul, after all. Mrs. Linda turned pale and began to ooze. Vanessa was frightened and brought her some water. She caught her breath, took a few sips and leaned back on the pillow. And then she said, "He wasn't lying to you, daughter. It turns out that Nicholas is my own brother. You had the misfortune to go to him yesterday. I thought he'd been in prison for years. I hadn't heard a word from him in years. Oh, he spoilt our lives, the bastard. He abused a girl, and then we were pecked at in the village. We had to change our surname and move far away. My father hated him so much, he forbade me to even mention his name. And I thought a lot when I was a child, because Nicholas was always kind, even though he was a bully. He was always getting into trouble. He'd steal a cow or a horse or gallop all over the village for fun. But to do such a thing, and that's how it was. Nicholas is alive, my goodness. I never thought I'd see him again. I never told anyone, not even you, that I had a brother. It's a shame, you know. It's nothing to be proud of. I was so shocked. I don't know whether I want to see him or not. What if he made it all up? No one knows how it really was." Vanessa was surprised and fervently retorted, "Mum, how can you do that? He's your own brother. Even if he was guilty, he did time for it long ago. His whole life is crippled. He's a miserable invalid. Why don't you care? We can't just leave him like this. Let's take him home. Here there's fresh air, nature. At least he'll go for walks. While there he's locked up in four walls and simply dying. Don't you feel sorry for him at all? I don't understand." Mrs. Linda sighed and said quietly, "Life is complicated, daughter. There's still a lot you don't understand. All right, let's go to bed. I need to think. We don't have much money ourselves, and here's a sick man. Can we live? It's been so long since I've seen Nicholas, I can't imagine what I'll say to him." The woman slept nervously. She dreamed of fragments of her distant childhood. Nicholas was 5 years older, but he was such a naughty boy, creepy. If they left him to look after Linda, he was bound to do something naughty. Mom would scold him, Dad would slap him on the back. Once I took my little sister to the river in early spring. He made a beautiful wooden boat himself. They decided to launch it, but it got caught on an ice floe and wouldn't float. Little Linda took a stick and started to push it, but she couldn't hold on and fell into the water. The boys were frightened, but Nicholas took off his coat and immediately jumped after her. He pulled her out and carried her home in his arms like a madman, whispering all the way, "Don't die, sister. I love you." It's my fault, the fool. I should have looked after you better. At home, Nicholas got a hell of a beating from his parents, and Linda was crying, defending him, squeaking like a mouse, "Daddy, don't scold Nicholas. He saved me, he's good." Then they were both sick and lay hugging each other on the warm stove. Nicholas held her and rocked her and told her all sorts of interesting stories, and Linda felt so good with him, so peaceful. And Linda remembered how once bullies had picked on her at school. Nicholas immediately swooped down on them like a kite, beating them and threatening them with his fist. "If you touch my sister again, I'll bury you." Then Nicholas went to prison, and they all moved away. My father forbade me to mention his name, stigmatized him in every possible way. He even ripped up all his photos and burnt them, shouted that he had no more son. Mom cried and didn't dare say anything. And her, Linda. Why didn't she even try to find her brother all these years? Why didn't she try to find out anything about him? And even now she was scared when Vanessa offered to take him away. Tears choked Linda. She thrashed around on the pillow and whispered, "No, you can't do this. Nicholas loved me so much as a child, protected me always, kept me safe. He never did anything bad to me. Who am I to judge him?" Vanessa's right. We have to help him. All his life he's been a poor bloke. No family, no kids. At least let him live with his family in his old age. Doesn't he deserve it? The next day, a worried Vanessa called Dan and began to tell him everything confusingly. She asked him to help her bring Mr. Nicholas home to the village. He happily agreed. The most important thing was to tell the man everything, to persuade him to move. Mrs. Linda said firmly, "I'll go to them myself. We've got a lot to talk about." Dan and Vanessa sat there for an hour, but Mrs. Linda and Mr. Nicholas still wouldn't come out. They wondered what was going on in the flat. Would the family reconcile? When Mr. Nicholas saw his sister on the doorstep, he immediately recognized her. The same gray button eyes and upturned nose, wrinkles only added over the years, and Mrs. Linda's heart sank when she saw how poorly Nicholas was. Tears were pouring from his eyes as he whispered in shock, "Linda, my sister, how are you here? How did you find me? Is it really true that girl Vanessa helped? I don't believe it. How many years has it been? A lifetime. I want to tell you the most important thing. I didn't even touch that girl. I didn't go to jail for anything, you know. On the contrary, I saved her. I just crossed the wrong man. But nobody believed me, so I lived my whole life with the stigma of being a rapist. Do you believe me, sister? It's very important that you believe me, do you understand? Tell me, where did you all disappear to? I looked for you after prison. I wanted to see you, to explain everything. But you were no longer in the village." And he couldn't stand it any longer. He sobbed, covering his face with his hands. Linda, too, could not hold back any longer, put her arms around her brother and whispered, "Forgive me, Nicholas. Forgive us all. We thought. And then my father changed our surname to Schul, so you couldn't find us. And Vanessa is my daughter, and she's your niece, so you didn't take in a stranger. It's fate, isn't it? I never would have believed such a thing was possible. I'm not leaving you here, Nicholas. Let's go to our village. Let me at least in my old age atone for my parents' sin and be with you, live together." The man could not believe it. He had never dreamed of such a thing. Immediately agreed, "With you even to the end of the world. But only I'm afraid. What if I become a burden to you? You see, I hardly ever walk. I don't want to ruin your life, sister." Linda took his hand. "I don't want to hear that again. We're one family and I'm ashamed I forgot that. So let me help you get ready. Dan and Vanessa are downstairs waiting to help you with your stuff. You'll be fine, brother. I won't leave you in the lurch." Mr. Nicholas moved to the village to stay with his family. Gradually the man thawed. He found himself back in a warm family environment for the first time since his childhood. He also started to go outside more often. Even though it was winter, it was nothing. He enjoyed breathing in the clean, frosty air, catching snowflakes with his mouth, and he felt as good and light as he had felt in a long time. They talked a great deal with his sister, reminiscing about their childhood. Mr. Nicholas had golden hands. He was always fixing things. He repaired the old cuckoo clock, the radio, and put the chairs in order. What a blessing it was to be needed by someone. And Vanessa was still pining, missing Gregory very much. For some reason, he stopped answering her messages and didn't pick up the phone. The girl's soul was troubled. Suddenly, one day, she saw a familiar car pull up in front of her house. She was immediately happy and jumped out into the street. She saw Gregory and threw herself on his neck. My darling, you're back. How good it is. Come inside, we've got news. I'll tell you all about it. I'll tell you everything, you won't believe it. But Gregory looked at her strangely and pushed Vanessa away from him, and then said sharply, "Why shouldn't I believe it?" "Very much so. So it's all true. While I was away, you were having an affair with someone else, going on car rides with him, and even spending the night at his place. Look at that." He threw a bunch of photos in her face. They showed Vanessa and Dan coming out of the driveway, then getting into the car. The girl looked at her fiancé, dumbfounded, and didn't understand anything. "So what?" "That's Dan, my friend. There is no relationship between us. Yes, I did spend the night in this house, but it's not what you think." "How did you get these pictures anyway? Was someone following us? Come on, you'll see for yourself." Gregory was furious. "I've already figured it out, especially since you don't deny it. I'm not going anywhere. And there's not going to be a wedding. I wish you and Dan happiness, advice, and love." He turned round, got into his car, and drove off. Vanessa stood on the road and sobbed, not noticing neither the prickly snow nor the biting wind. Her mother brought her home, said something, consoled her, but Vanessa heard nothing. It seemed that all her dreams and her whole life at that moment collapsed. From that day on, it was as if the girl had died. No, she still got up at 5 in the morning. Her mother helped with the household, but she was like a robot. She ate almost nothing and cried day and night. She was still madly in love with Gregory and did not understand what was her fault, why he had left her. Mr. Nicholas just shook his head. It was hard to watch. So he rang Dan and told him everything and said, "Look, do me one more favor. Try and talk to this Gregory and explain it all to him. I tell him it's probably his mom's trick. Whether he'll believe it or not, we don't know, but it's worth a try. Linda says Gregory wasn't a bad bloke, though. If he loves Vanessa, he'll make up with her. I can't stand to see my niece pining for him and killing herself." Dan was just as indignant. He had a fiancée a long time ago and was getting married. And now this. He had found out where Gregory worked and had been waiting for him at the entrance for a long time. And then he came up to him and said, "You coward. Vanessa was set up and you believed it. You didn't even listen. What kind of a man are you after that? Do you even know what happened? What your parents did? They cheated Vanessa out of her money. She could have stayed out on the street at night. Don't you care? I guess you don't love her, and she's pining for you for nothing." Gregory was stunned and angry. "I saw the photo. It's you two together, the two of you. You should be happy I gave in to you. You can fall in love all you want." Dan began to tell Gregory everything confusingly. He looked at him in disbelief and shook his head. "I don't believe it. Mom couldn't have done that. You made it up on purpose to protect Vanessa. We have nothing more to talk about. Goodbye." Aye. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted, and Gregory was determined to find out. He loved Vanessa, was angry with her, thought of her as a traitor, and yet he longed desperately for her. That day he came home from work, unexpectedly early. He had a stomach ache and wanted to lie down. And then he saw the familiar heeled boots. Helen was in the corridor at their house. I wondered what she was doing here. They'd broken up a long time ago. The boy crept as quietly as possible into the kitchen and listened. Helen and his mum were there drinking wine and chatting sweetly. The girl, grinning, boasted, "Well, Mrs. Merrill, I've kept my end of the bargain." And Gregory quarreled with that country wench. He believed she'd gone off with that bloke. That was a good idea, sending that fool to another address with that cripple. While I was watching her all night, it all worked itself out. I didn't even have to think of anything. It's like heaven sent me this guy. And your husband sent his son away on a business trip on time. Everything came together. Now, I want to be Gregory's wife. I don't know how you'll do it. And that hillbilly is just a misunderstanding. I'm from your circle. I'll be a worthy daughter-in-law, not like that uneducated milkmaid. They raised their glasses and drank. Mrs. Merrill said, "You should know how glad I am to be rid of that woeful daughter-in-law." It was easier than I thought. The fool really believed my husband and I were calling her to visit. Naive. And yet even I don't understand why she stayed the night at that invalid's house. She's a strange one, after all. Gregory clenched his fists. He opened the kitchen door abruptly and glared angrily at both women. Helen even jumped up in surprise and started babbling. "Oh, Gregory. Hi, I was just passing by, and I thought I'd drop in for a friendly visit. I thought I'd have a little chat with your mom." The guy shouted angrily, "I see you're still going on about it. So you're the one who set Vanessa up and sent me those pictures. Tell me why. I don't love you, and we'll never be together. And you, Mom, how could you hurt my fiancée? What did she do to you? You've never even seen her once. So the business trip was part of your master plan? You think you did it. Did you break us up? No way. I'm leaving this house for good and my job too. I'm going to Vanessa's in the country and beg for forgiveness. Money isn't everything, Mom. It's a pity you and Dad forgot about it." The boy moved to the first floor, began frantically packing. He opened the family locker, started going through the documents to get his own. And then he came across one document. He reread what it said for the umpteenth time and couldn't believe it. It was an adoption document. Gregory even felt sick to his stomach. Jesus, it's getting worse by the hour. So I'm not born to my parents. I'm adopted. And when he read the names of his birth parents, he was speechless. They were longtime partners in their family who had died. Gregory moved down again and shouted, "What is this?" "Mom, I'm asking you, why didn't you tell me I was adopted? How could you even do that? Tell me. All these years I was lied to in this house, and I, like a fool, did not realize anything. I couldn't understand how we got such a tough bunch if my dad's parents were from the country, too. I asked my father many times, but he kept avoiding the answer. Now it's clear you adopted me on purpose to take my father's fortune for yourselves. Isn't that right, Mom? Why don't you say anything?" The woman cried out, "So be it, so what? What's wrong with that? Didn't we love you? Or did you need something? Do you think you would have been better off in an orphanage? It doesn't matter, Gregory. Daddy and I love you, and we only want you to be happy. And don't you understand you're keeping me from marrying the girl I love? Well, thank you, benefactors. You know, Mama, there's certainly nothing to keep me here now." Helen left in a hurry. She didn't want to get involved in the family squabbles. Gregory packed his suitcase and left too. Mrs. Merrill sobbed inconsolably, only now realizing that she had lost her son forever. Gregory stomped around the gate and knocked at the window, but Vanessa would not open the door. Mrs. Linda came to the door and patiently explained, "Gregory, understand that Vanessa doesn't want to see you. You've hurt her badly. Go home. It's cold. It's freezing." The boy was stubborn. "I know. I'm a fool. I'm guilty. And that's why I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait here until Vanessa forgives me. I didn't come to visit you. I came to live. I've got no home, no parents, no job, so I've got nowhere to go." Mrs. Linda paced back and forth, not knowing what to do. Mr. Nicholas watched the boy's stubbornness and waved him in. Gregory immediately went into the house. Mr. Nicholas met him in the hall and held out his hand. "I'm Mr. Nicholas, Vanessa's uncle. I'm the one she slept over at the time. Dan's just my neighbor. He's got a fiancée. He and Vanessa are just friends. Are we clear? Come on, Romeo. I'll reconcile you." The boy followed the man into Vanessa's room. She was sitting in a chair, sobbing inconsolably. Mr. Nicholas said to her sternly, "Vanessa, don't be daft. You love each other. It's obvious. You had a fight. You didn't understand each other. Who doesn't? Well, stop making a mess of things. Make up right now. Linda and I will set the table for you in 15 minutes for dinner. Is that clear?" Gregory timidly embraced Vanessa and apologized, "Sweetheart, I beg you. Forgive me, you fool. This whole dirty game was started by my parents and Helen. She was the one who followed you and took those photos. And when I saw them, I was so jealous, it made my head bleed. I jumped on you, I didn't realize. I suffered myself. Do you know how bad I felt without you? I only found out the whole truth today and realized what an idiot I was. I almost lost you. I also found out I'm adopted. Can you imagine that? So I don't have a home anymore. I've come to live with you for good. Will you accept me? Vanessa immediately forgave her fiancé. They hugged and kissed, and then they couldn't talk for a long time. Vanessa told Gregory how she had found her uncle thanks to his mother's knowledge, and Gregory told her who his real parents were. Suddenly, the girl asked anxiously, "There's only one thing I'm afraid of, my dear. You've never lived in the country. The only amenities here are a bathhouse and a toilet in the yard, and there's no work, only if you go to the farm. What if you can't stand it, run away? I'll be alone again. Everyone's already looking at me. One day there's a fiancé, the next he's gone." Gregory reassured the bride, "I promise, no matter how hard it is, I won't run away. I want to live my life with you. Do you understand? I have enough of my own savings to live on for the time being. And then we'll see. I'm a programmer. I can work remotely. The main thing is to have a computer and good internet. And village life is very much to my liking. Communications can be brought into the house. It's not a problem. But it's quiet, peaceful, no fuss. And the air is intoxicating. It makes my head feel so light. Thank you for forgiving me, my love. I promise never to upset you again." And so the village life went on. Gregory used to shovel snow as a warm-up, and he helped Mrs. Lind in the stable. He was particularly fond of the baths, jumping into the snow and shouting to the whole neighborhood. Vanessa laughed. Gregory was a smart guy and managed to find a remote job and started earning good money. In the spring, they decided to expand the house, made major repairs, and put in some amenities. They lived amicably, the envy of all. Mr. Nicholas also worked hard, and all something mastered in the barn. He spent hours in there, kept it a secret for a while, but after a month he called everyone there and proudly showed his work. Everyone gasped. It was a wonderful cradle for a baby. The man said, "Well, young people, I'll say this. It's time to get married and give birth to Linda's grandchildren. It's not human to live like this." And he was right. My sister nodded and did not interrupt. "I'm all for it. And we'll celebrate the wedding in the club. We'll set the tables there, and there's plenty of space. We'll dance. What do you think, young people?" Gregory replied firmly, "No way. We'll celebrate properly in a restaurant. I've already saved up for it. I'll buy Vanessa the most beautiful dress. And then we can go out in the country, just like that. Darling, why don't you say something? Or have you changed your mind about getting married? I'm offering you my hand and heart. Do you agree?" Vanessa finally waited. She cried and nodded her head and was the happiest she had ever been at that moment. All this time, Gregory hadn't spoken to his parents, cut off all communication, couldn't forgive their betrayal, even though it made him feel lousy. His mother and father, though adopted, really loved and spoiled him. It was a sin to complain, and not to invite them to his own wedding was quite indecent. So he made up his mind and called his mum. She grabbed the receiver at once, as if she had been waiting for his call, and began to gibber, "Son Gregory," at last. "How are you doing? We don't know anything about you. We miss you so much. We're so sorry, it's our fault." Gregory said dryly, "I'm marrying Vanessa. Mum, the wedding is the day after tomorrow at the Weak Cat restaurant. You and Dad are invited too. But if you start any more of your shenanigans, I'll never forgive you again. I've made my choice. Put up with Daddy and accept him, please." Mrs. Merrill hastily replied, "Thank you for inviting me. So we're not strangers to you after all. We will definitely come. I promise everything will be fine. We love you very much, son. You just know that." Gregory replied sincerely, "I love you and Daddy too." Vanessa was irresistible on her wedding day, radiant, in a snow-white dress, long curls arranged in an elaborate hairstyle, with fresh flowers woven in. Gregory was radiant. He never left the bride's side for a moment. Mrs. Linda and Mr. Nicholas were also happy for the young couple. There were not many guests, but all close and dear. When Vanessa saw Gregory's parents, she tensed. But he reassured her, "Don't worry, I invited them. I couldn't invite my mom and dad to my own wedding. Mom promised me everything would be fine. Believe me, she's changed." Mr. Will took the microphone and solemnly began to congratulate the young people, "Dear newlyweds, congratulations on your marriage. We wish you happiness, love, and more grandchildren. And son, my mom and I couldn't accept your bride for a long time. There was such a sin, and we almost lost you. Vanessa, Mrs. Linda, you'll forgive Merrill and me for getting on your nerves, but it's all in the past now. Live your life the way you want to live it, son, as long as you're happy. And most importantly, we really did adopt you, Gregory. I couldn't let you grow up in an orphanage because your birth father was my partner and best friend. We loved you with all our hearts, and Mom and I decided it was only fair to take your birth dad's share of the business. It's rightfully yours. I've opened a bank account in your name. All the money's in there, so you can use it as you see fit. And now let's give a big hallelujah shout." The wedding was a great success. Everyone was having a good time and dancing. And then Mrs. Linda suddenly suggested, "You know what, matchmakers, let's go to our village. Tomorrow we'll continue the fun there. We've got to start somewhere." Mrs. Merrill hesitated. She thought of life in the country as something terrible. Dung, stink, cows, no amenities. What could be good there? But Mr. Will was happy to support the idea. "Let's go. Why, will you organize your own bathhouse for us? I remember how my mom used to steam me with a broom when I was a kid. I remember the smell of the Russian stove and how wood was thrown and steamy milk. How long ago it was." The second day of the wedding was even merrier than the first. The whole village celebrated with a harmonica and dancing. Mrs. Merrill suddenly got drunk, ate borscht with homemade pickles, and quietly sang songs with local women about women's hard lot. And, it must be said, she was very good at it. And then all steamed in a bath, drank tea from a real samovar. Around the holidaymakers smelled blossomy apricots. The sun was shining affectionately. Somewhere roosters were crowing. Mr. Will put his arm round Mrs. Merrill and said, "Oh, it's so good. It's been a long time since we've had such a simple, homely holiday. You know, Merrill, I understand Gregory now. She's a nice girl, and her family is so hospitable. Well done, the house is well maintained, all the comforts of home. May they be happy. I'm happy for my son." The children abandoned their mother in the village and didn't even come to her funeral, and when the notary read the will ... MP4. Samantha was annoyed. There was a session coming up, a lot of tales to catch up on. I have to pass, I don't have a penny to spare. And then there's this funeral. Mother's neighbor Auntie Annie called and said the funeral's in a day. That's round-trip tickets and probably organizing costs. If John or Stella haven't taken over. I wonder if they already know, but to write to her brother or sister Pride wouldn't allow it. Samantha decided not to go, not to spend, not to see the faces of relatives with their sneers and claims. She was studying anyway, so she had nothing to do there. She'll come later and sit on the grave. There was no regret or longing on Samantha's face, rather irritation with a hint of sadness at the shaky way of life. Relationships with her mother. Older brother and sister had been difficult all her life. Her mother molded her into a pretty girl, forbade her to go out and do what she liked. She forced her to learn lessons, help around the house, iron her school uniform from the evening. The forbidden fruit only beckoned more. She slapped her stubborn daughter for her first cigarette, took away her phone when she saw Samantha kissing a boy at the gate. Her brother called her the naughty one from kindergarten. Her sister rolled her eyes and clucked her tongue. Eventually, at the age of 16, Samantha had another fight with her mother over a bow, snapped and left home. She lived with a guy, finished school, then left with him 500 kilometers away to a big city. She worked for a long time, survived the breakup, but saved up for education. And only at the age of 23 she finally entered a university, when she realized the value and necessity of a diploma and education. The girl did not maintain relations with any of her relatives. She had enough friends and colleagues. Rumors, of course, came, what and how, but Samantha did not look for them purposefully. Why? to be told she was a slacker. No, now Samantha was not willing to sacrifice even a fraction of what she had worked hard and longed for. She was studying, working, and in the midst of all that, it was unrealistic to find time for a trip. And she didn't want to be honest. "They'll sort it out without me," the girl decided and pushed the outline closer. Stella's mother had failed to mold a decent girl. Unlike her straightforward younger sister, she had a cunning, dodgy character, went by the head, and was not afraid to use methods that others seemed dirty. So without much connection in higher education, Stella became the manager of a small travel firm by the age of 28 in the capital. She had a short haircut and generally looked very apathetic, with tattoos all over her arms, bright makeup, and expressively pounded face beauticians. The news of her mother's death caught Stella in another country, when she had just checked into a hotel with a girlfriend. The voucher was a 10-day trip. As a calculating and practical lady, Stella calculated how much it would cost for an unplanned return flight and the missing trip, not to mention a ruined holiday. The decision was obvious: to stay and rest. If she wanted to, Stella could make it to her parents' funeral. She was in a good financial position, but principle intervened. "Management is not for women," her mother grumbled. "Our business is to keep the coziness of the house and hearth. Let men earn money. It is their natural destiny. We have a different purpose." "What's the purpose, Mum?" "We are not cogs in the engine. People choose what to be," argued Stella. "It won't do any good if you go against nature." Her mother was unsteady. "You've already gone, you've drawn pictures, and it's time to think about your family." Stella rolled her eyes in her favorite manner and snorted. "Our song is good, start again," it's called. Talking about family, husband, and children had caused her gag reflexes since she was in transition. Her mother's old believers pissed her off more than anything else. The inculcation of humility and norms of domostroy ended with the girl doing the opposite. Dress, cut with scissors, dressed in jeans and aggressive rocker outfits. Instead of boiling borscht, Stella chose sketches of future tattoos, and instead of romances for the sake of bouquets and sitting under the moon, she looked for profitable acquaintances. She knew that she wanted to lead, to decide, and to get out of this box of traditional values, where her mother stubbornly shoved her. Of course, by the age of 28, her dream had come true. A chain of useful connections led her to the owner of a travel agency. There Stella promptly got a job, then twisted romance with a man and made it so that he re-registered the business on her. Behind left a broken life of the ex-wife, a pile of fired unwanted female employees, and a pile of gossip. But the ambitious girl did not care. Winners are not judged, as they say. Stella combined management, partying, and constant traveling. Not even cacti could survive at home, let alone husbands, children, and dogs. Self-sufficient, selfish Stella loved unrequited only herself and did not want to sputter on anyone else. That's why she quickly got rid of the suitor, pulling off his business, very clean from a legal point of view. In this succession, Stella went to her mother's house once a year, or even less often. She was sick and bored at her parents' house, with no one to manage her. John himself could make a horde of vocational school students stand at attention when his visits overlapped with Stella's, and Samantha ran away with her boyfriend. That left arguments with his mother, where there was nothing new from year to year. To make matters worse, Megan began to drink and complain about her health. And Stella wanted to get out of her father's house as soon as possible, so as not to cross paths and not to listen to the old woman's complaints. Her brother will sort it out himself. He is a man, and he is the eldest, decided the apathetic head of the travel agency about the news. She should have been there a long time ago. God forgive her, she thought a little later, but didn't say it out loud so her girlfriend wouldn't hear. If Megan was trying to make real women out of her daughters, she was trying to raise a real man in her son. But again, it had turned out to be a mess. John, from a small age, was forced almost everywhere to solve his problems by himself, to stand up for himself and not to roar. If Stella and Samantha were nurtured by their mother with standard feminine instructions, she demanded from her son steadfastness, firmness of character, stubbornness, and determination. In the end, it paid off. John was indeed the leader of the class, the head of the class and the first in his studies. But in the shadow of achievements hid a callous heart despotism, narcissism, indifference to other people's problems. He could make caustic jokes about ugly classmates who secretly counted on his interested gaze. He could bark at his sisters and his mother herself. Samantha spent her childhood hiding from her brother in corners when he came home in a bad mood. John did not understand other people's tears because of a bad grade or worldly injustice. After school, the guy went into the army and decided to become a military man for good. For status and benefits, he married a shy girl from the countryside, made a child, and by the age of 33 moved with his family to the Baltic coast. We could only guess what was going on at home because his wife did not dare to say a word against him. Only a shadow in a dress looked out from behind her husband's back. The fool was clear that he was walking from his wife and generally feels his complete power and impunity. John came home mostly because of some paperwork issues. He knew that his mother began to be friends with the bottle, but limited himself to rare duty calls and money transfers with the words, "Here, go to the doctor." Stella, he thought of her as a boy baby and almost a fallen woman. Samantha was an outright fool and a loser. He always made an example of himself to them, without listening to any arguments. As a result, when all of them were almost separated, communication was reduced first to dry hello in the walls of the house, then to short texts on holidays, and later in completely hushed. And everyone was happy with everything. The neighbor's call came over breakfast. John listened to the news with a stone face. He pondered what to do. The death of a relative is a valid excuse, and it's certainly possible to leave the service. But firstly, it was a long way to go by aeroplane. And secondly, he had long ago had nothing warm ties with his sisters, or with his mother herself. Only actual blood relation. He hadn't been to his homeland in 2 years and didn't care at all. And then there's a funeral. Something akin to longing tugged at John's heart, but quickly faded. "Will you fly?" his wife asked timidly, serving coffee. "No, I'll send money for everything. They'll organize it themselves," said the man. "What about the inheritance?" the wife asked again. Hey, John suddenly thought about it. "You're right, but we don't know if Mum left a will. And if not, then we'll get the house for 3 by law. We don't have to break up either, because these things can be solved from a distance nowadays." Aunt Annie was standing by the fresh pit, holding the hand of a young girl. Apart from them, there were about 10 other people at the funeral, neighbors, friends, and former colleagues of the deceased. They never arrived. John, Stella, and Samantha. Aunt Annie wiped her eyes with her handkerchief and adjusted the black mourning bandage on her head. "Oh, it's not Christian for children not to say goodbye to their mother." "We can't make them," sighed the girl, clutching the carnations in her hands. "You're right, Eve, you're right. Megan brought them up, she put her whole soul into it. And the children grew up so ungrateful." Aunt Annie complained. "At least they will come to visit the grave." There were many kind words and tears about the modest wake. But more than one person asked Annie and EVA why none of the deceased's children were present. And they didn't know what to say. After all, they all personally called, or rather Eva knew, but she was too reverent to Megan in life, and too respectful of her memory after her death to explain to each questioner what was the matter. "What are you crying for? Pray tell." Megan looked seriously at her son's red face. The boy was rubbing his eyes with his fist and pointing at the sandpit where another boy, Nick, a young bully, was having fun with his blue brand-new toy truck. "He hit you and you're crying? You have to be a man." Megan reprimanded her son. "Otherwise you'll always be like this. You'll always be a crybaby." John stopped, sobbed, and looked at the offender. "Don't hit him first, but if you get hit, hit him back," Mom instructed him. "And don't give yours back unless he asks for it first and says please." John sat down on the bench and frowned, his 6-year-old brain digesting his mother's words. Olga watched the child but did not hurry to return her son's toy. After a couple of minutes, John got up, walked to the sandbox. "Give back my car, please," he asked the offender. Instead of answering, the bully threw sand at John. At the same moment, the boy jumped on Nick and hit him hard on the back of the head with a plastic spatula. Soon a siren sounded again from the sandbox, but from a different source. A battered John in dirty shorts was proudly carrying the blue lorry home. That day he realized something. That brute force works better than the word please. At the time, his father was still living with them and was also doing his part in raising their first child. He forbade his son to impose female duties and chores on him. He said that a man should study, earn and fight, and his wife would wash pots and iron the laundry for him. As a result, the boy did not know how to make a bed or fry eggs at the age of 9, but he quickly realized his superiority over girls, and with this position entered adulthood. His father was in a car accident and died when John was 13, Stella was 8, and little Samantha had just turned 2. Megan didn't so much grieve as exhale. Alex was a quiet tyrant and demanded total obedience from the entire family. Megan wanted her son to respect women and be strong in spirit, but his father's bad influence had already taken root in the boy's subconscious. The sound of broken dishes in the sink jerked Megan out of her slumber after a night's work as a cook. She heard the noise and scolding from the kitchen. "Clean up your own mess," Stella shouted, pointing her finger at the dirty plate on the table. "That's your job." John shrugged his shoulders and indifferently threw the dishes on the floor. "Stop it," Megan shouted at them both. "Stella, is it hard for you to clean up and help your brother?" "Mum, I'm not the maid to clean up after everyone." The scandalized 10-year-old put her fists to her sides. "He has exams coming up, he's studying, he's tired. What are you, like a little girl?" begged Megan. "I have a test tomorrow, so let Samantha clean up after us," said Stella. Megan stopped and shook her head. She silently picked up a plate from the floor, cleared a second one off the table, cleaned everything up and turned around. John had removed himself from the kitchen with a triumphant look on his face. Stella was breathing noisily, her nostrils flaring wide. "Daughter, you're smarter than that. You should be softer, more flexible." Megan put a hand on her shoulder. "I don't want to." Stella objected. "I don't want to be like you." She stomped her feet and ran to her room, struggling to provide for the children after her husband's death. Megan worked very hard, took more shifts, didn't go on holiday for years, and still had her own business and garden at home. No personal life, no hobbies. Megan lived for her children and the desire to give them the best education, summer camp, clothes, goodies, toys. She would buy something for herself when a previous item wore to holes or ripped. One day a woman was getting ready to go to a parent-teacher conference for her 11th grade son. John looked at his mother's stompy shoes, a stretchy skirt with an old oil stain, a linty blouse, and a late 90s fashion jacket. The guy wrinkled his nose. "Don't go, I'll say you've been working," he stopped the woman who was already making her way out. "Why, son?" Megan looked perplexed at her offspring. "They'll think we're begging," John replied shortly. "Don't embarrass me, Mum." The woman froze on the doorstep. She had barely taken time off work to hear about her son's progress from the teachers' mouths. Megan turned to the narrow mirror on the exit and looked at her own reflection. In front of her stood a tired, unkempt lady with bags under her eyes. John took her mother by the elbow. "I'm not a big boy, they won't scold me for sure, but you already know that." Megan went back to her room and tears came to her eyes, then sleep watched the exhausted woman. When John left for the army, Stella was 14 years old. Megan had hoped her daughters would be her helpers, but the exact opposite had happened. Transition age at Stella began to manifest itself early, but very clearly. It was immediately clear that the father's genes left their imprint here. The girl was hysterical on any occasion, closed the door, and crooked her face at any attempts of her mother to impute to her some morals. But among her girlfriends and friends, Stella enjoyed authority and had unquestionable power, and she could expel or punish her unwanted comrades with her own hands. "You can't do that," daughter Megan sighed, as she listened to Stella's boastful stories. "You'll make enemies." "I can," she said. "You can't, but I can." "Are you going to torture your husband like that? He'll run away in a week." The woman shook her head. "Who said that I would have one at all?" Stella folded her arms across her chest. "What do you mean?" Megan shook her hands. "What about a family? Sooner or later you'll want warmth, coziness, babies. Ugh, disgusting. Stella grinned. I've seen enough of you. Thank you, don't. There are much more interesting things in life than cleaning a man and feeding a baby. The conversation was over. Megan had asked herself many times, why did the children grow up the opposite way, not the way she raised them? Instead of love, understanding and respect, selfishness and narcissism gurgled in each. John remained in the contract service and enrolled as a part-time student in college to qualify for an officer's rank in the future. He hardly ever called, and when he picked up the phone, he waved off the fact that he had no time to talk. By the end of high school, Stella was more concerned with her own appearance than with grades and exam preparation. She worked part-time at various places to get tattoos and fashionable haircuts. Megan didn't know about the first for a long time. The latter she accepted with a stretch, calming herself with the fact that hair, not teeth, will grow, and the pictures on her daughter's body she saw when it was too late. A piece of work popped out from under the sleeve of her t-shirt. What, asked Stella snidely, watching her mother stare at her arm in horror. Do you want to see the whole thing? The girl took off part of the t-shirt. A grinning dragon in mottled colors and bright spots looked up at Megan. Why, tell me? The woman frustratedly sat down on a stool. I wanted it so badly. Stella shrugged her shoulders. Do you like it? It's not right. Megan mumbled. It's a lifelong stigma for a girl. You'll be seen as a you-know-who. A decent guy doesn't need a coloring book. Mum, Stella shouted. I've argued it 1,000,000 times and I'll argue it 10 billion 1,000,000 times. When you were a kid, you only got tattoos when you were a convict and a girl of easy virtue. In your youth, you had to study, get married, and have a baby. In your worldview, girls wear dresses and boys wear trousers. I'm so sick of your lectures. She threw the dirty rag she was wiping the table with at the wall and ran off to her room. In the evening, Stella ostentatiously dumped her shredded skirts and dresses on the carpet in front of her mother. You can't make me wear this now, no matter how much you want to. I've seen these traditional feminine values in the oven. Megan didn't argue anymore. Her daughter was wearing her down with her behavior, drinking her dry like a glass of water. She only hastily wiped away a tear when she saw the blue dress she'd bought for her daughter's graduation in a pile of rags. Once in a while, Megan was visited by her neighbor Aunt Annie, a vivacious grandmother who had also raised 2 children on her own, tilled the vegetable garden every season, and kept poultry. Stella treated Aunt Annie with indulgence. She could treat her aunt to jam, but she didn't interrogate or teach her. Samantha often played with her neighbor's grandchildren and took her well too. You're looking a little gaunt, Megan. It's time you quit this kitchen, Aunt Annie said, stirring her tea with a spoon in her mug. Well, what's there to quit? Megan waved me off. What are the helpers for? There are 2 growing up. Annie nodded at the framed pictures of the girls on the wall. Megan twirled the mug in her hands and gazed at the floating tea flakes. Annie, I don't think my kids love me, she exhaled. What am I doing wrong? Oh, come on. Aunt Annie waved her hands. All children love their parents, and so do yours. You do so much for them. That's what I'm saying. Megan nodded. Annie took a candy from the vase and rustled the wrapper. A child's individuality should be embraced. His view of the world to encourage, to guide, just a little support, she mumbled. So how to accept, if they break their life, their future life? Megan thumped her fist on the table, spilling her tea. But it's their life, and you can't protect them from all their mistakes. Aunt Annie calmed her down, helping her to wipe up the puddle on the oilcloth. The world is changing, and they are changing. You're teaching them to accept. What about you? Megan suddenly froze. Her neighbor's words poked her in the soul, but she couldn't admit it. The woman was trying to be a caring mother from a position she'd seen in her childhood and thought was right. I have 2 boys. Annie sat back down. So what do you think? They drank and smoked when they were young. They went out and got Fs. But now they're both handsome, both family men. They bring their grandchildren to me on weekends. Real men have grown up. The neighbor clapped her palm on the tablecloth. I scolded them, of course, in a good way, but I left the right for mistakes and bumps. The woman continued, if you insulted your friends, you got a slap on the neck from them. If you tried vodka, let it get so bad that it would kill you. That's how it's brought up. Only on their own skin they understand. I can't do that, Megan shook her head. Her neighbor took her hand in a conciliatory manner. Megan, even if you can't, the main thing is that you love them and want the best for them. They'll grow up, they'll understand later. For now, let them be sarcastic. Don't take it personally. Be above the childish antics. They need to prove themselves. Spread their peacock tails, let them. Megan remembered her daughter's tattoo, her son's capriciousness and coldness, and could not understand how she could react calmly to such an attitude from people close to her, although that was exactly what the kind-hearted neighbor had insisted on. A paradox, no other way. Stella ran away to the capital with some maid at the age of 18, having drunk a lot of her mother's blood. She didn't want to go to school, but she did some management and executive courses. Megan had many conversations with her daughter about the need for a normal education, but everything was like a pea against the wall. Stella was of a different opinion and stubbornly continued to tear down the standardized female image. Samantha was growing up too, and at first Megan thought she was a sweet and docile child. She wasn't soulless and narcissistic like her brother. She wasn't selfish and dodgy like her sister. She helped around the house, even though she grudgingly cooked and cleaned. But since she was 14 years old, Samantha's mind was exclusively on partying and boys. She often skipped school, ran on dates, hanging around with one suitor and another. Teachers called Megan with interrogations and requests to influence her daughter to no avail. One day Samantha endured her mother's admonitions for a long time, and then she gave out. I'm young, I want to have fun. I don't want to grow moldy over books. Megan was appalled by this statement. If John and Stella at least had goals and desires, even if they didn't quite fit the gold standard, Samantha was close to going down a crooked path. And so it happened. One day Megan found her daughter's packet of cigarettes in a secret jacket pocket. So she burst into her room and yanked Samantha right out from under the covers, sleepy. You're smoking. Megan yelled at her. I don't need an ashtray in my house. She grabbed the strap from her bag off the chair and slapped it across her defensive daughter's back. Megan had never hit a child, except for a little spanking when she was a kid, but here it was as if she'd snapped. It was as if in that blow she had unleashed all her anger for the three of them on one. Afterwards, Megan repeatedly blamed herself for the outburst, and her son's words, Samantha is a naughty skirt, came to mind. Then Samantha did not speak to her for 4 days. She didn't stop smoking, but she hid it better, out of spite. She also stopped doing things around the house, also out of spite. She had a tomboy, an 11th grader, and the kind of handsome guy that drives girls under 20 crazy. Samantha was no exception and went head over heels in love. Christian's schooling was lousy, but he secretly drove her around in his dad's car at night. He taught her how to pour beer without foam, and always told her about some shady dealings with the boys. Samantha was impressed and dreamed of running away with her lover to the end of the world. So in the evening, her mother caught them kissing under the cherry tree at home when she returned from work. Megan knew Christian and his family well, rarely earning a living anywhere. Father a lover of the collar, mother a gossip. Samantha was elbowed right out of her beau's arms. Mum, why do you always get on my nerves, she said. You should be studying, not cuddling in corners with this guy, Megan said angrily. I'll take care of it myself. You haven't lived your life, let others live theirs. Will you sort it out if you become a whoremonger? Megan felt her voice breaking into a croak and her face burning with anger and helplessness. How could anyone accept such a thing? How could anyone knowingly accept the desecration of their own child's life? Megan didn't understand. Samantha wanted to say something, but froze. The scandal ended when Megan didn't find her daughter's things at home the next evening. She called her, texted her, asked her to come back, begged her to come to her senses. But Samantha said briefly that now she lives on her own and does not need her mother, who considers her a walking wench. So the woman was left alone in the big house. And the other will say, live happily ever after. The offspring are off her back, but not Megan, no matter how the kids treated her. and coming to empty rooms was harder. She called both John and Stella, but they didn't like to talk long, saying they were busy. They came rarely and not for long. Aunt Annie came in frequently and did something to brighten the loneliness of her mother. Megan even got a cat to keep her from being bored, but she could only listen and meow back. Soon the long hours on her feet and the age of 55 made themselves felt. At the examination, the woman was informed about a whole bunch of problems: varicose veins, cardiovascular disease, joints. Gradually, Megan herself did not notice how she began to befriend the bottle to brighten the loneliness and drown out sad thoughts. Aunt Annie walked into Megan's house and found the landlady asleep in the kitchen at the table. The woman roused her. Lately, Aunt Annie had been very concerned about her neighbor's condition. She had become unsociable, crying all the time, and even the house had become neglected. Annie tried to visit more often, but she couldn't stay with Megan. She was in her 70s. "Megan, come on up. It's morning," she shook her yawning and mumbling landlady. She jumped up, looking round and then shamefully hiding the wine bottle behind the table. "You've had enough of living on your own," Annie said as Megan cleaned herself up and began to prepare breakfast. "Who needs me? Men look at young men, and I'm old." Annie smiled, though she meant something else. "Men, it's a matter of time," said the neighbor, "and I think that you need an assistant and company." "My helpers are gone," Megan sighed, setting down her cocoa. "You're just rushing off the beaten path again." Aunt Annie scolded the woman. "I have an idea how to help you, so you can have more fun without this happening." She kicked an empty bottle under the table. One of Annie's sons often supplied orphanages with goods and other help from concerned compatriots. Orphans on reaching adulthood were supposed to be given flats under a state program, but in practice some waited years for them, and some didn't get them at all, but they had to live somewhere. "There's a girl there, EVA, she was pretty, but she didn't get a flat and had a baby when she was 19. Now she's scrounging around. You know how hard it is to earn money for rented accommodation with children. I feel sorry for the girl." "I don't know where you're going with this, neighbor." Megan listened intently. "I'm saying that you should take her in and help her with the household, and it won't be boring. And you'll do a good deed. You won't work forever. You'll be cooking soup and borscht in this canteen. And I'd get Ivotchka a nanny at the kindergarten through my old connections," Annie finished. Megan frowned. She didn't like the prospect of letting a stranger with a baby into her house. But then again, Annie was right. She was already going crazy with loneliness. It couldn't get any worse. "Could you vouch for her?" Megan asked her neighbor. "If I didn't vouch for her, I wouldn't even be having this conversation," Aunt Annie nodded. "I've known Ivotchka for a long time. I even wanted to adopt her. But where would I go as an old woman? Didn't they approve? So let her help you and live with you," Megan said. Annie looked into her eyes carefully, warmly and understandingly. "Megan, I'd take it, but you need it more." "I can see that." Stella looked irritably at the mud on her new shoes. The mud of her hometown, where she'd fallen into when she'd got out of the taxi. "Home, sweet home," she muttered through gritted teeth. Stella wasn't going to be here long, and the next day she already had a plane to the capital, so she stayed in a hotel. She was preparing herself morally for the meeting with her relatives, her older brother and younger sister. After all, for the first time in many years, they all had to gather together in the notary's office for the announcement of her mother's closed will. The news of it came as a great surprise. Stella had assumed that the house would go to the three of them in equal shares according to the law of inheritance, but not so. The girl was tormented by a bad feeling. The call with the news again took her by surprise when she returned from holiday. Now there was no way to get out of it. Who knows what the shifting on correctness maman scribbled in the will, and the very fact of its existence was a surprise in the midst of troubles. There was nothing to do. I had to board the aircraft again. Not to leave all her mother's possessions to her relatives, to a crazy soldier and a naughty skirt. Stella even thought over in her head how she could competently take away their parts of inheritance from her brother and sister. She even called the lawyers she knew, who were frequent visitors in her travel agency, but they only shrugged their shoulders, saying that a closed will is a cat in a bag, and therefore some schemes can be proposed only after its announcement. The notary's office was not far from the center, and near the entrance, Stella noticed a familiar figure with an army uniform. She snorted quietly and prepared to greet her brother. "Hi, you're still the same," she said as she approached him. "Hi, I can't say the same for you." John glared at his sister. He didn't like her haircut, or the tattoos that peeked through her translucent blouse on both arms, or the lemon-colored stiletto heels and red trousers. Stella appreciated the look and rolled her eyes, but quickly regained her neutral expression. They exchanged short phrases about life, weather, and nature, and waited for the last participant of the meeting. Surprisingly, there was almost no longing or sadness in the words of these people, only a poorly disguised irritation at the need to disrupt the usual way of life. No one even thought of going to the cemetery to say goodbye to the deceased. "She's a slacker in her repertoire," John grinned. Lighting another cigarette, she was told to be here by 12, so it's early morning, and she's not here. "She's probably wondering where she woke up today," Stella chimed in. Probably mocking her younger sister was the only thing she and John had in common. Soon a taxi pulled up outside the office. A disheveled Samantha jumped out in a hurry. Her hair was tucked into a ponytail, her crumpled t-shirt straightened out of her jeans. "I think you were right," John whispered in Stella's ear, glaring scornfully at his relative. "You're late," Stella said without greeting or ceremony to her younger sister's face. "I know," Samantha snapped back. "It's not my fault the bus took so long." Stella rolled her eyes again and pushed her fringes aside. "You'll make it up to me later," John said sarcastically as he pulled open the door. "We have more important things to do right now." The notary, who looked like a business canary, put everyone in their chairs. "First of all, I'm sorry for your loss. Losing your mother is a great blow. If I may, without further ado. We're busy people. We don't have much time." The notary nodded ceremoniously and asked for the testator's death certificate. John pulled the document out of his briefcase and handed it to him. The man ran his eyes over the papers, checked something, made a short note, and finally pulled an envelope from a desk drawer. He showed his signature and date on it. Mum must have felt it. She had drawn up a document 6 months before she went to the other world, Stella whispered, not addressing anyone in particular. Why did she have the nerve to write that will in the first place? John replied irritably. Maybe someone put the idea in her head, Samantha suggested, and instantly caught the frowns of her relatives. Both of them didn't like the idea, because the consequences could be bleak. The second envelope was also properly signed by 2 witnesses and the notary himself. In one of the curlicued signatures, Stella recognized the hand of her neighbor Aunt Annie. The envelope was opened, and at last the required paper lay on the notary's desk. The deceased's will was written on an ordinary yellowed sheet of paper from an old notebook, which did not fit in with the official office and the situation. While the notary read out the text, Stella nervously tapped her fingernails on the phone screen. Samantha was stirring a candy wrapper in her hands. John was crunching his knuckles. Everyone realized the importance of the moment and waited. I bequeath all my movable and immovable property. The notary raised his eyes at the audience, made an expressive pause to EVA Smith. There was such silence that one could hear a fly crawling on one of the folders on the far shelf. I take it there is no Citizen Smith here. The notary looked at the young people with equal surprise. What? Stella jumped up first from her chair. Who the hell is Smith? What the hell is Smith? What the hell is going on here? She rushed to the table, wanting to see for herself if she had heard a mistake or a joke. But her mother's handwriting said exactly what she'd heard. None of the names of the 3 children Megan had put in the will, and the complex signature at the bottom with its many curlicues testified to the genuineness of what she had written. Stella remembered from high school trying to copy it in her diary and failing miserably every time. We won't leave it like that. We'll contest it. We'll sue that Smith, whoever she is. Yeah, sue all you want. The notary shrugged his shoulders indifferently. My business is done. Oh, and don't forget the copies. Under the puzzled, lost, and somewhere angry looks of those present, he made 3 copies of the will, certified them, and handed them to everyone in turn. I'll get that Smith from under the ground, thundered Stella on the doorstep of the office, not at all embarrassed by passers-by. This is the house, and my father's garage, and the land where he wanted to build a summer house. Samantha was twiddling her thumbs in horror. Her mum gave it all to her. John spat in the flower bed. I wish I knew what it was for. It's all right, it's all right. We'll sue, we'll get every last plank in the house. Stella's eyebrows rose angrily, her eyes blazing with rage. We will. Only you. Don't expect us to share too much. John slowed her down. What do you mean? Stella drilled him with a glare. I've got a son growing up. He needs a place to live too. John emphasized the word son. And I need to invest in my business. You'll earn a house for your son too. Stella bit him back. Hey, I don't actually have a flat. I live in a rented one. Samantha shouted, listening to her brother and sister bickering. Both of them stared at her with such eyes that it became clear that they were ready to get rid of the third applicant for the inheritance right here. Samantha squeezed her head cowardly into her shoulders. The bickering under the door of the notary's office continued. Everyone realized that a quick resolution of the case would drag on for an incomprehensible period of time and incur costs and nerves. Meet Eva, and this is her son, Oliver. Annie introduced Megan to the girl standing modestly on the doorstep. She had a 1-year-old baby in her arms and a small check bag. She was poorly dressed, but she had a thick, shoulder-length blonde braid and huge blue eyes that still held a certain childlike naivety and belief in miracles. Megan remembered how children had looked at her with those same eyes, a long, long time ago. Ivochka, you come in, make yourself comfortable. Megan will show you everything. Annie pushed the hesitant girl into the room. When the guest had left, the neighbor asked her, Megan, why don't you look like you belong here? Good girl, did I ever cheat you? She's good, Annie. She's good, Megan said. But I'm not used to her. You know, I need to look at her more closely. Megan looked at her for a couple of weeks. At first, the conversations between the new acquaintances were awkward and clumsy. Aunt Annie, as promised, got the girl a job in a kindergarten, where she was happy to go to work. This way she could look after her baby and earn a little money. In the house, Eva did not do much housekeeping, only asked short questions about cleaning and other household trifles. The baby didn't interfere with anything and was quite quiet. The awkwardness was gone, thanks to His Majesty Chance. Megan, I'm back, Eve said loudly as she opened the door. The landlady's shoes were in their place, but she herself could not be heard. The girl cautiously entered the room, placed the cradle with her son on the armchair, and found Megan napping. There were a couple of empty wine bottles on the floor next to the sofa. Eve rushed over to the woman and began to bring her to her senses. Megan opened her eyes and looked around awkwardly. She had promised herself every day for the past 6 months that she wouldn't buy any more wine, that she wouldn't lock herself in her room and drink until the pinching feeling of emptiness was filled. But when she returned from her shift, her feet carried her to the shop, and her gut demanded relaxation. Megan guessed that Annie had insisted that Eve move in because she knew about her neighbor's addiction and was worried. Also, everyone realized that Megan's children didn't care about her. They were busy with their own lives and would at most put their mother in rehab for a while. Megan, what are you doing? EVA looked worriedly into the woman's eyes. Your blood pressure, your heart isn't right, and you're drinking. Megan staggered back. The girl shamed her, but justifiably so. And then the unexpected happened. The accumulated tension, longing, sadness overflowed the cup and tears spilled out. Megan buried herself in Eva's chest and burst into tears. The girl fell into a stupor for a few seconds, and then embraced the woman and began to affectionately stroke her back and comfort her as if she were a small child. I always dreamed of having a big family, said the lady of the house, while Eva was pouring tea. I wanted to be a mum. I played mother's daughter all my childhood, read fairy tales about princesses. Oliver sat in the pram, staring at EVA and Megan. He listened too, occasionally crooning and banging his fist on the side of the stroller. Mom didn't allow her to go out with boys. She taught her to be meek, docile, soft. She told me to take care of myself for my husband. And I looked at them and my father and thought that I would have the same, a warm family atmosphere and respect. A hot dinner in the evenings at a big table. Our table was small though, and our flat was only 2 rooms. Megan sniffed her nose like a schoolgirl. Eve put the cups on the table and sat down on a stool next to her, watching her son, who was starting to fall asleep. I always thought that my husband was a support, a wall, the main and wise one. That's how I lived until I met Alex. I fell madly in love, but I didn't see who. I got pregnant with John. We got married. And then Alex moved us here, to this house, and I realized I was in a fairy tale. The woman grinned and sipped from her mug. Not the fairy tale I'd read, though. I thought I was a princess, but it turned out to be Cinderella. You'd know how much I crawled here on my knees pregnant, scrubbing the floors, washing all the windows and mirrors every day. I cooked 3 dishes with a belly first, second, and compote. Eva listened without interrupting. My husband worked, received well, we had enough, but he demanded perfect cleanliness and housekeeping, and I happily ploughed like a horse on the domestic barns. I loved him a lot. Caught rare moments of tenderness from him after reproaches for dirty table or unpalatable cutlets. I thought it was my own fault. I didn't work hard enough. I didn't look. Then my son was born and I went into motherhood, began to raise my own joy. Only bad things stick easier and faster. We all know, and instead of a good son grew a copy of her husband, who thought that a woman should only. Oh, his poor wife now, poor girl. How guilty I feel for her. Megan sniffled again and hastily pulled a napkin from the napkin holder. It's not your fault, Eve intervened gently. You did everything you could to make the child happy. Bad example and bad upbringing played a part. I wanted to raise my son to be a noble, kind and fair man like his grandfather, Megan explained with a sigh. It's a shame he spent so little time with his grandson and left early. If only it had been different, if only it had been. My love, care, and involvement were taken for granted by my husband and later by my son. I realized this many, many years later. I didn't see my mistakes then and made the same mistakes with my daughters. Oliver dozed ludicrously in the pram, arms outstretched. Megan stood up to cover the baby with the blanket. Eva didn't bother her. When I got pregnant with Stella, my husband demanded I contribute to the family budget, so I ran headlong into a job. We're a family. But mentally, he ate me up every single day. And then I found out he was cheating. I cried to my mom, looking for support. She said that everyone has such patience. The main thing is children. He'll take a walk and come back. That's how I learned that my own father wasn't such a noble man. Just my mother was wise and did everything to make me see the perfect picture. It was already getting dark outside the window. A fine October rain began to pour down the panes. The neighbors 2 houses away had a rooster crowing loudly for some reason. EVA drew the curtains and carefully carried Oliver, who had fallen asleep, into his room to put him to bed, promising that she would be back soon. When the new neighbor tiptoed carefully into the kitchen, Megan was already making tea for the second time. And I did a new stupid thing, the landlady continued. I forgave him, just like my mother said. Why? I was young, naive, only 26 years old. My husband realized that he had complete power over me and could go unpunished in any situation. He nagged for every speck, for crumpled laundry, for the mess of children. And I obediently tolerated and only scolded myself, that bad mistress, bad mother, bad as a woman. And then the 3rd pregnancy, I decided to leave, hoping for miracles once again. But no. In bringing up the girls, my husband was stricter, scolded for any disobedience, even the very tiny Samantha, and for some reason I gave in. I clogged their heads with marriage, correctness, wisdom, femininity. Oh, if only I'd realized sooner, if only I'd realized. Megan made eyes at the ceiling and often stopping the tears that had returned on her lashes. And when her husband crashed with his mistress, as I found out later, it was as if the rope around my neck had loosened. I wondered myself that I should be sad and crying, but I wasn't. Even though I had to work harder, I was glad, but for now only that no one else would come to my bed from under someone else's skirt. Quiet humiliation went away and my eyes began to clear, but I still lived indoctrinated by my mother. A woman needs a family, a loving husband, her own corner. I tried to instill that in my daughters. I got so far that now they both see me as an enemy, and my son as a second-class man. Eve moved closer and lightly hugged Megan, whose shoulders were shaking. I wanted so much to raise sweet, affectionate girls, but with my impositions I've raised an egoist and a walker. Do you know, Ivochka, what is the saddest thing in this story? She looked up at the girl. I realized my mistakes only when they all left. And I'm old and alone and none of them need me. Megan, don't be so nervous. Eve's calm strokes on her back were soothing. All people make mistakes, but there are no mistakes that can't be corrected. You did what you knew how to do. You loved and cared for them as best you could and knew how. I'm sure it's worth talking to everyone and everything can still be saved. Oh, my dear, do you think I didn't try when the realization hit me? Megan sighed. I called. I wrote. I invited them to visit. They waved me off, said they were busy. The only thing I got was a couple of meetings with my grandson and money for medicine and doctors. I decided to go to them myself, but they stopped me. I tolerated, tried to understand, to justify them, but I knew I was deceiving myself. I was burned by this feeling of helplessness before those whom I myself created. And I broke down. Yes, I started to drink. It's the only way I can dull for a little while the pain of not being needed by my children. All your life you have given yourself and your joy to those around you, husband, children, strangers. Were you ever really happy? Eva asked cautiously. I don't remember. I was happy for my son's grades, for my husband's success, for the fact that the children ate well and did not get sick. That's not it, Eva said, although as a mother I understand you. I'm happy when Oliver eats and sleeps well. But that's different. When you were happy for yourself, were you genuinely happy inside? This time Megan was silent for a long time, trying to search her memory for such a long-forgotten feeling, and found it only in childhood, when her mother brought her a small kitten from work. Megan had played with it for a long time, cherishing it and stroking it. I think I'd long since forgotten what it felt like, she said quietly. A lot of people forget, but it is very important to keep the ability to be happy at any age. Eva smiled. Let's learn again. Come on, and please just call me Megan. The woman smiled weakly in return as well. Thank you. Surely the neighbor knows who this Eva is, Stella reasoned as she sat in the taxi, once again cursing at the lack of asphalt in the dirt of her hometown. When the fervor for swearing at the notary's office wore off, the trio decided to go to Annie's. She had called with the sad news she was also a frequent visitor to her mother's house, and her signature was on the envelope with the will. Stella, Samantha, and John agreed that she was the person to ask first. There wasn't much time. Everyone had their own things to do in town. They wanted to solve the difficulties that had arisen quickly, but it was not to be. Not only the situation became tense, but also periodic jokes and sarcastic clues to each other added fuel to the fire. They found the neighbor at home. Stella did not hesitate to bang her fist on the wicket door. Aunt Annie came out. Hello, hello. She greeted the unexpected guests with a youthful strut. And I've been waiting, wondering when will you shameless people show up? Aunt Annie, let's not get moralizing. Stella wrinkled her nose and tried to go through the gate. Aunt Annie put aside her bun, blocking the girl's way. You have no conscience at all for not coming to your mother's funeral. And as soon as you opened the will, you came running. The neighbor continued to reprimand the sibling standing by the fence. That's the law. John couldn't take it anymore and raised his voice. Why are you shouting? The granny told him. You've grown so big you've put on epaulettes, but you've never become a man. John opened his mouth in amazement. They remembered the neighbor as God's dandelion, who never said a rude word, brought them sweets and sweets. Let's put down what you think of us. Answer one question for us, and we'll never see each other again, Stella said in a tone that muffled the conflict. Suddenly a girl peeped out of the kitchen window of the house, which overlooked the wicket. Aunt Annie, what's all the shouting? Is everything all right? Yes, Ivochka, go put Oliver down. I'll be right there, the neighbor replied. Ivochka? Stella's eyebrows went up. Just a minute, but it was too late. Aunt Annie slammed the wicket door shut with an unprecedented swiftness for an old woman. There was the suppressed shriek of Samantha, who had her fingers nailed, followed immediately by John's profanity. The company realized that no one else would talk to them here. The swinish attitude towards their mother had played its part. Stella and John took some documents and things from the once empty house, and then all three of them left for their respective cities. "This is for you," Eve smiled radiantly and handed Megan a candy floss stick. For me, the woman was so confused that she looked at the treat with fear and confusion. It was Indian summer, a Saturday. Both of them had the day off. A small circus was performing in the local park. EVA, on the pretext of going out with Oliver, had dragged Megan out to walk there. Come on. She jokingly hurried Megan on her doorstep. On the last warm days of October, it's a crime to stay indoors. The woman hesitated at first, but then agreed. Megan caught herself thinking that it had been a long time since she'd taken a walk like this. All her routes were calibrated for a specific purpose: work, home, shop, hospital. She had somehow forgotten that you could just wander aimlessly for fun, chatting with someone and not constantly looking at your watch. The park was already beginning to put on its autumn finery. Crimson maples were dropping a carpet of patterned leaves on the pavement. Birch trees were swaying their soft branches, where, like a scattering of coins, the foliage was golden. In the flower beds, late velvets and dahlias bloomed with furry pom-poms. The sun glistened on their petals with beads of night rain, and only the fir trees were unperturbed green spots in the orange-red of October. Megan even admired the landscape, breathing in the still warm but already damp autumn air. She remembered long-forgotten sensations: calmness, joy, silent, quiet delight, when vanity seemed to be wiped away like dirt from glass. "Did you enjoy the performance?" Evie asked. "Yes, I haven't been to the circus in probably 20 years, Megan admitted. I never thought I could go there just for fun, without a reason or my kids." "A lot of things are fun to do for no reason," EVA said, fixing Oliver's cap, who said you needed a reason to be happy. Megan looked at her with either respect or sudden insight. "You know, EVA, you're not at all what I used to think you were," she admitted. The girl laughed. "Who did you expect? A new with a moping temper?" "Well, not exactly," Megan faltered awkwardly. The question had stumped her. EVA wiped Oliver's applesauce-smeared hands, put him back in the pram, and said, "I came to the orphanage as an adult, at the age of 12, and I already knew what it was to starve, what it was to hide from a drunken father in the cellar. That's why I learned to appreciate joyful moments, and in the orphanage I realized that if you let your guard down and cry all the time, you can go crazy." Now Megan listened eagerly to her companion. It was amazing how Eve's appearance didn't match her strong core inside. It was carefully hidden from view, though. And then I thought, why do we only rejoice on holidays? I mean, why do we do that? Gifts, surprises. Why are we trapped in this stereotype? I started to break it as best I could. First, I made paper cranes for all the children in the orphanage, and then I figured out how to sew beautiful outfits from the things that were donated to us. We even organized a fashion show once. Megan laughed. She was surprised at how much will, fortitude, and courage to appear different was in this fragile girl. I loved what I was doing. And I saw that joyful moments are very much needed all around, from small to great. My students reached out to me, and of course someone fell in love with me. EVA sighed. It was a spontaneous feeling, an impulse inspired by my idea, a joy in the midst of grayness. But now I have this little Kolobo. She patted Oliver's head affectionately. But all is never well. She glanced meaningfully at Megan, and when I turned 18, I found myself with a baby outside the orphanage. They wanted to leave him there, but I wouldn't let them. I couldn't get a flat, and I rented a room in a communal flat on my cleaning lady's salary and child allowance. That's how I realized to the fullest extent how important it is to be happy that you just live, and perhaps help others to live. "Is that why you went to work with the kids?" Megan suddenly guessed. Yes, Eva nodded. Children still know how to enjoy the little things. With adults, everything is drowned in routine, in some stereotypes and invented frameworks. We drive ourselves into a cage where there is nothing but vanity, problems, and fears. There are very few people who in adulthood can genuinely rejoice and see the beautiful things around them. She pushed back her braid and pointed to a woodpecker on the trunk of one of the maples. Megan also noticed the bird with the red beret hopping busily on the bark. "You've welcomed me into your home, and you've been kind, and I'm eager to help you enjoy life again," Eve said. "And you're starting to get good at it." Megan hugged the girl, hiding her wet eyes from her. It had been a month since that conversation in the kitchen that evening. Megan had forgotten the last time she'd had a drink, and her house felt cozy and bright again, in a way it probably never had been before. Maybe it was because both women needed that coziness, and both tried to keep it. Evenings were spent talking over fragrant tea or taking walks. Eve told Megan about everything. The woman was amazed at how broad the girl's horizons were and how much she had missed in her life. One day the group wandered into the evening park again, and some guy gave both of them a rose. Megan was so embarrassed she didn't know where to put the flower. She finally wanted to come home in the evenings, to cook something delicious, to hang out with Oliver and listen to EVA. It was amazing how close to her this girl, a stranger by blood, had become. Aunt Annie sometimes came to visit and watched Megan come to life more and more, the blush returning to her cheeks and the sense of purpose in her eyes. It was as if Megan had gained a daughter and a grandchild during this time, and there was no talk of rightness or marriage. How easy it was to accept someone with their particular views, cockroaches, and experiences. And even if EVA cooked soup differently, cut bread thickly, and scrubbed floors the old-fashioned way, Megan no longer wanted to argue, to correct, to teach. And it was not indifferent humility, but the very acceptance she had always imposed on her daughters, imposing what she herself didn't understand. One day at lunchtime, two men in overalls knocked on the gate of Megan's house. The landlady stepped out, looking behind the wicket in surprise. Eva was putting Oliver down for his afternoon nap. "Hello, we're from the utility company. We're checking for wiring past the meters." The men introduced themselves and shoved a form under Megan's nose, which she didn't have time to look at. "We're legal," she said, confused. "If it's legal, we'll check for frayed wires. What if you have a leaky roof? The danger of fire due to a short circuit is not a big deal." One of the guests raised a finger and put his foot very firmly into the courtyard. "All right," the woman stepped aside, allowing the worker to pass. The repairmen began to examine the wires and their location, then with serious faces looked at the pole, scratched their heads, wrinkled their brows, and as a result they said, "You have one wire here that is not connected to the meter, and the coating on it is frayed. We should cut it off and see if there's any sign of a short circuit in the house." "I don't think it's shorted out. The TV's working. The light bulbs are intact." Megan shrugged. "You can tell the fireman the same thing later," one of the men said indifferently. The woman had no choice but to let the workers into the house, and they began to do a lot of work there. They started climbing along the sockets, picking at the lamps, looking into the switchboard, examining how the wires were laid, without even taking off their muddy boots. Megan just sighed with a palm resting on her cheek in the corridor. 10 minutes later, one of the workers came up to her again and said with a mournful face, "Mistress, there was a leak in the ceiling near the switchboard and sockets without grounding. You need to repair, or Shirokranet's 220V from the kettle or iron in the rain and all." He even made scary eyes for convincing. "So how is it? How many years have I lived and everything is calm?" Megan only splashed her hands. "You live for so many years and tomorrow it will happen," continued to frighten her interlocutor. Suddenly his partner came out of the corridor, followed by EVA with a telephone in one hand and a heavy glass decanter in the other. "We don't need to change anything," she said sternly, shaking the schedule. "We didn't call anyone." "What are you doing, girl?" "We've come to fix the malfunctions," waved his hands at a man in blue overalls. "Troubleshooting that you just invented yourself. Get out or I'm calling the police." EVA showed the dialed number 02 on the screen. The men cautiously put their heads into their shoulders and glanced round. Megan was dumbfounded, but her hand instinctively picked up the heavy Soviet kernel on the table, which she had recently used to pour soup for lunch. "Megan, these, shall we say, electricians came in with no tools, no ID, and a piece of paper from the internet. Call them and have them picked up." After saying that, the men rushed out of the house, almost knocking down the doors. All Megan could hear from the backyard through the window. "I thought you said it was a woman living alone, you dear." When her pounding heart calmed down and her breathing became steady again, Megan was already sitting at the table, waiting for Eve to put some valerian in her glass. "How did you realize that those crooks weren't from the utility company?" she asked the girl. "I saw and heard from the window how you let them in, and I noticed at once that they came without tools. Electricians don't just walk around like that, and they won't come at all if you don't call them." Eva was watching the drops on the neck of the vial, and then one of them dropped the paper they were shoving in your face, and that's when it all became clear. She set the glass down in front of Megan and pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of her pocket. It was a crooked scan of a 3-year-old installation permit. "Oh," the woman sighed, "what would I have done without you?" "Obviously, you would have been left with no savings," Eve answered bluntly, "but everything turned out fine. But let's change the locks on the gate and the door. You never know." The women became almost kin to each other. Evia had made friends with the younger members of the kindergarten staff. She sometimes asked Megan to babysit her son while she made time to go to the hairdressers or do some shopping. It was a joy for Megan to babysit Oliver. She even thought of him as her grandson. How different were those happy moments from the few hours she was allowed to spend with her blood grandson. John and his wife were constantly criticizing her for everything and literally ripping the baby out of her arms. It was different with Oliver. He was happy to collect colored pyramids of rings with Megan, throwing cubes and balls, learning to walk, supported by a caring woman. Eva would sometimes come and watch from the corner of the house, watching Megan's care for her son. Everyone understood, and everyone needed it one evening. The girl walked into the kitchen to take the baby from the lady of the house and noticed a slight sadness on her face. "What's wrong, Megan?" Eve asked worriedly. "Oh, Eva, my heart aches for my own children." Megan sighed. "I wish we could communicate with them like we do with you. About everything in the world, at least on the phone. They haven't called or written in 6 months. Samantha ignores me completely." Eve thought about it. "I think you can try to improve your relationship with your children, but you need patience. I've put up with an arrogant husband all my life. I'm sure I'll have enough patience." Megan gave the girl a serious look. To pick up the phone and write to the children, these thoughts caused in the woman a stupor and fear of a new refusal to contact her loved ones. So strangely, she both wanted and feared it. Fear vividly resurrected memories of her youth, of caprices and torments with the hard characters of her offspring. And then Megan pushed the heavy thoughts out with an effort and began to remember the autumn walk in the park and after the circus show. She imagined walking like that with Stella or Samantha. Finally, having tuned in enough, Megan dialed her eldest daughter's phone. "Hello," Stella's voice came through after a series of long beeps. "Hello, Stella." Megan exhaled, gathering her strength. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine. Why are you calling?" Her daughter's voice became suspicious. "Do you want money for the doctor or something?" "No, daughter, I just want to talk to you." The woman swallowed. "Well, you talk. I'm listening," agreed on the other end of the phone. Something rustled in the phone. A knowledgeable person would have immediately realized that the call had been put on speakerphone. "Stella, you and I have never understood each other," Megan began. "It's probably my fault. I forced things on you that I was unhappy with without realizing it. Please forgive me, but now I realize my mistake and I want to know how you live and breathe. I want us to be able to talk like girlfriends and not hold grudges. Is that okay with you?" There were clicks, distant mutterings, rustling. "Why are you talking to your girlfriends?" Stella's voice came from somewhere, as if from far away. Did Aunt Annie come? Or what? Then it became clear that the girl is settling some work issues on another phone. "Yeah, we're chatting." Megan's lips quivered. "Bye, daughter." She pressed the cancel button and cried, covering her face. Eve rushed to comfort the poor woman, but she sobbed like a wounded animal. "Oh, I'm an old fool for hoping for a miracle," Megan scolded herself through her sobs. "Who needs me with my morals?" "I do, let's try again." Megan looked at her dejectedly, smearing her tears. A little later, right? Eve corrected herself, nodding cautiously. The frustration and sadness left Megan alone only towards evening. She realized that one attempt wasn't enough, that more would be needed, and already the first one had stabbed at her soul. It was even scary to call John. He was the most callous and cold-blooded of the three. The woman didn't even know what words to choose for such an important conversation with her son. Only Eve's closeness, her support, sincerity, and participation gave Megan strength and determination. John picked up the phone immediately, unlike Stella. His clear, service-chiseled hello rang through the house, even from the tiny speaker. "Hi, son." Megan began. I wanted to. "Mum." "Hurry up," John interrupted her irritably. "I've got things to do. What's up?" "Nothing. Nothing." The woman lowered her eyes sadly. "I'll leave you to it." "Yeah, go ahead," came from the other end. "We'll try again later. We can't give up." Eva comfortingly took Megan's palm in her hands. The woman was no longer crying after the second call, but her eyes were filled with resignation. "Ivachka, I don't think it's any use. They're adults, and they've been used to ignoring me for so long that it's too late to re-educate them." "And your youngest, Samantha? Is she a little older than me?" Eve wondered. "I don't know her contacts," Megan said. Embarrassed for some reason, she blocked me everywhere after the fight. "All I know is that she lives in the city and is studying, I think." "Well, there had to be some kind of communication channel, right?" Eve wouldn't stop. Suddenly, Megan jumped up and hurried into the room, muttering something. She rummaged through the dresser for a long time, then pulled out a dusty diary. Among the recipe entries on proper cotton washing and phone numbers, the woman found her daughter's email address. She used to use this address at school back in the day. Megan pointed to the corner of the page. "I can't believe I didn't remember before." "It's better than nothing," Evie said. "We'll think of something to write tonight. In the meantime, why don't we go get some ice cream?" "Ice cream in December?" Megan smiled. "Why not?" Eve winked at her. "Who says we can't? You'll be in a better mood in no time. Just what the doctor ordered on a gloomy day like this." She went into the freezer for a batch of ice cream. Megan watched with a cheek resting against her cheek. She realized that Eva was trying her best to keep her spirits up, but her motherly heart would still ache. Even though Eva had become like her own daughter, she couldn't undo the mistakes of the past on her own. It's amazing how sometimes common troubles pull together and try on even sworn enemies. After returning to their respective towns, Stella, Samantha, and John started a general chat room where they discussed the issues with contesting the will. It took a couple of weeks to figure out Eve's identity and get the outside story. Albeit with a creak, the company agreed to split the inheritance exactly 3 ways. Nevertheless, Stella pestered the lawyer with questions about how to legally get the most of it. The poor boy already regretted that he had tangled with her, and mentally cursed all the gods who once invented the court and inheritance. "This is Evka, an orphan with a litter," Stella broadcasted in the voice message. "Allegedly took care of her mother for the last year, but there are no documents to prove it. So she and her offspring are screwed." "It's interesting," John answered. "Some left-handed girl with a child lived there for a year, and her mother described everything to her." "What kind of a ride of unprecedented generosity is that? Can I live like that, and in a year or 2 I'll have a flat?" Samantha finished. Stella clicked her pen irritably. She was pissed off by the situation. The world of calm, measuredness, stable income, parties and holidays shook because of this idiotic will. Now, thanks to the efforts of her mum, she had to make a fuss, spend money and time. "Yes, relatives know how to put a pig under the door," she said under her nose even after death. The prospect of sharing was not pleasant either. Talking to her brother and sister was annoying. John covered himself with the baby, Samantha with the lack of a place to live. The first was pushing his way through, the second was whining like an itchy mosquito. Stella caught herself thinking that she wouldn't mind doing her brother and sister a favor if they were busy solving urgent problems here and now instead of gnawing out their inheritance. Eva and Oliver had gone to daycare, and Megan had just returned from her night cook shift. For weeks now, the woman had been plagued by a vague premonition. She'd been thinking, deciding, calculating things in her mind, weighing things, but she'd never told EVA. The woman took a nap for a few hours, thought it over once more, and went to her neighbor's house. "Annie, I want to write a will," she blurted out, sitting down in front of her. "God be with you, Megan." Aunt Annie waved her hands in the air. "Are you going to die?" "I have a premonition. I don't know. I just have a feeling I should do it now." When Aunt Annie stopped oohing and ahhing about her neighbor's statement, she clarified. "It took me a long time to get round to it, but I think I'm doing the right thing." "Well then, it's necessary to call a notary if you're going to do it," Annie thought. "Yes, we can't do it without a notary," Megan confirmed. The women called the notary's office and made an appointment. The notary informed them that they would need 2 witnesses. "Don't tell EVA, please," Megan asked her neighbor before leaving. "I thought we were going to use EVA as a second lookout." She shook her hands. Megan shook her head. "No, we can't have her." Annie thought for a moment. "I've got a son coming over in those days. Maybe him?" Megan agreed, nodded, said goodbye to her neighbor, and went home with a slightly relieved heart. The day before, she had spent a long time composing something else, an email to her youngest daughter. She wrote a bunch of pages, scribbled, wrote again, scribbled. Then with difficulty she created a mailbox with Eve's help and slowly retyped the text onto the screen. It had been a week since she'd sent it, but her inbox was just as sad and empty. Evie had said that sooner or later her daughter would respond with something, a single word. Megan tried to believe. She generally tried to notice more good things around her. It had become an acute daily necessity on the way to getting rid of the enormous guilt and resentment she felt toward herself, her children, and life. And at times Megan felt she was succeeding. In the flight of a swift, in the glint of a puddle in the sun, in the warmth of a mug of fragrant tea passed from hand to hand, she gathered the grains of her medicine. And close by was the one who always supported and protected the fragility of the recovering soul. Stella enlisted all her connections and hired the best lawyer available to challenge her mother's will as soon as possible. It took several months, but the girl got her way. In court confirmed that as direct heirs of the first turn of the native children of the deceased, the 3 of them, Stella, John, and Samantha, have legal rights to receive all the property of the mother. However, the second part of the plan could not be realized. The inheritance was awarded equally to each of them. Nothing. Stella rubbed her hands together as she left the courtroom. "We'll use our own methods here. The main thing is that the sneaky orphan was left with nothing." The bossy head of the travel agency was accustomed to do so when legal methods were exhausted. A couple of conversations hit the right pain points, scare her, gather dirt. Who cares how she gets what she wants? John and Samantha didn't attend the trial. The first referred to the service, the second on the cost of traveling. Stella alone represented the interests of the 3, though the interest here was rather entirely hers. The relatives were notified of the entry into the inheritance by registered letters from the lawyer. The girl thought over ways of action, how to force the fools, brother and sister, to sell the mother's property as soon as possible, so as to hide from them part of the income from the transaction. Stella's plans were Napoleonic. She had long yearned to open a second branch of the agency, to exchange her 1-bedroom for a 2-bedroom closer to the center, and what to say, to run away to the States. Neither a fair division of money, nor the welfare of relatives, Stella did not care what was to say about a strange girl with a strange child. Neither EVA nor Aunt Annie attended the trial. The old woman and the young mother had no opportunity to go to the capital, although they knew what was happening. EVA was taken aback when she learned that Megan had left her all her possessions. The girl was very confused. She experienced 2 shocks in a month, first from Megan's death, then from her will. The woman passed away in her sleep, having had a heart attack. Eva found the one on her bed when she got home from work. It was 2 months after the will was written. Megan had a feeling, and she wasn't wrong, unfortunately. Where the hell is that damned abstract? Samantha muttered irritably to herself as she picked at the bowels of her laptop. The previous day she had been given a study assignment, and she remembered that at school she had prepared a big report on a similar topic. Samantha decided to find it, print it out, and hand it in again, so that she wouldn't waste time collecting and processing the material again. Stella had contested the will, and now the three of them were the rightful owners of the house, land, and garage. Samantha was tempted to look for a cozy flat in the suburbs. She was already dreaming about moving in, what kind of renovation she would do, what kind of sofa she would buy. All the furthest school folders of the laptop were dug through and through and through. Nothing could be found through the system search either. Samantha was already nervous, imagining a sleepless night preparing an essay. But her memory told her that she had sent the paper to the teacher's post office in the 10th grade. She had to remember the password to the mailbox she hadn't used for a long time. After much manipulation, Samantha managed to log into the account. She began scrolling through her inbox with interest. Mostly there were advertising offers, emails from some dreary scammers, and archival photos of her classmates. Stop. What is this? Suddenly Samantha saw a letter from an unfamiliar address. It was strikingly different from everything else that had accumulated in her email box over the years. It wasn't that old. It had been sent just under 8 months ago. My eyes ran along the lines indifferently at first, but with each word I read, interest, anxiety, embarrassment, realization, and shame grew like a snowball. Hello, my daughter. How are you? I don't know whether you will read my letter or not, but still I hope for the former. I want to ask your forgiveness for everything from beginning to end, for the upbringing you disagreed with, for my desire to mold you into a copy of myself and condemn you to the same torment, for my inattention to your inner world, and for the gulf that separated us that evening at the courtyard, turning into years of silence and coldness. I hope you'll forgive me. I didn't realize my mistakes until many years later, but I don't blame any of you three. You grew up to be who you grew up to be, and I'm still secretly proud of you all. But we've made so many mistakes. Resentments, misunderstandings, harshness, rudeness have divided us all as if we were strangers. How many of your happy moments I missed and didn't see, for which I now blame myself terribly. I wouldn't have dared to write to you, my daughter, if I hadn't had help. I met a girl who opened my eyes and showed me what I had been depriving myself of all the years of your childhood. I finally have the strength to admit it. I realize I'm asking the impossible, but let's try to become just a little closer as family people. I hope with all my heart for a speedy reply. Your mum, Megan. Samantha finished reading the letter, lips jumping, shoulders shaking. She threw herself onto the back of a chair and burst into tears. Those pure and sincere words from her mother burned all the years of resentment out of Samantha's soul. That night the girl did not sleep. She forgot about the essay, about her studies, about the fact that she had to go to classes the next day. Samantha sat on the floor of the room against the wall until morning, hugging a small plush toy she had brought from home many years ago. It had been given to her by her mum for the 1st of September. The toy had been gathering dust under the couch in a bag for years, but today Samantha found it, blew the trash away, cleaned it, and coddled it like a kitten. At dawn, the plush was wet with tears, her eyes swollen, her face flushed. As soon as the clock struck 8, Samantha realized it was time, or rather, she could already. She frantically flipped through the phone book, looking for Aunt Annie's number. When she found it, she called the older woman, apologized repeatedly, and struggled to get Evie's number. Her fingers trembled. Samantha exhaled, hastily wiped a tear from her cheek with the palm of her hand and dialed the numbers. Hello, Eva. You don't know me, but we need to talk. My name is Samantha. I'm Megan's youngest daughter, and I want to give you my share of the inheritance. Seeing a rich woman throwing away a baby pram, a beggar decided to take it for herself. And as soon as she opened P4, Sandra scrutinized the woman's face on the laptop screen. It so happened that the search engine had accidentally given her an article about this Tiffany, the founder of a charity fund to help children in difficult situations, left without parents or brought up in very poor families. A mature, well-groomed woman, kind look, open smile, stylish, so energetic. Sandra couldn't take her eyes off her face. She gazed, remembering was she or wasn't she. It looked like she was. She couldn't be sure. After all, Sandra had seen her only once in her life almost 15 years ago. And yet some inner feeling told her that this was the woman who had once played such a big role in the fate of their family. What would have happened to them all if it hadn't been for Tiffany? Or was it not her after all? Sandra ran her eyes over the article once again. It talked about Tiffany's life. She was quite happy now as she had finally found her true calling. The woman helps children and considers it her life's work. Tiffany had even taken in 3 babies from an orphanage, the kind that everyone else had given up on. They had health and behavioral problems, but now they were well-adjusted teenagers, 2 girls and a boy. They posed for pictures with their foster mother, beautiful, dressed up, smiling. And just 10 years ago, no one would have given them a chance. Tiffany proved by her own example that the impossible is possible. The main thing is love, faith in children, and willingness to work long and hard. Not everyone can do that, of course. Tiffany is rich. Her husband is a big businessman, the owner of a famous chain of petrol stations. And she's achieved a lot herself. For many years, she worked as a stockbroker and managed to make a fortune. In an interview, Tiffany admitted that she used to consider her career as the main thing in her life, and money was not even the main motivator. No, Tiffany grew up in a fairly wealthy family and has never known want. Sandra read this article on the internet like a fascinating book, holding her breath. It seemed that Tiffany was the guardian angel and savior of their family. Everything fit together with amazing accuracy. It was just that the work fascinated her, enthralled her, completely inspired her. It was kind of like an interesting game that a woman would give herself over to. And then everything changed. Tiffany was in her early 40s at the time. She started thinking about having kids. And that's when it became clear that it wasn't that simple. Sandra pulled away from the screen, leaned back in her chair, and sighed heavily. The memories came back to her in slow waves. Heavy memories of the past. She had been on the verge of despair then. Sandra couldn't cope with the hardships that had been thrust upon her. Nothing good seemed to lie ahead of her. The hopeless misery of survival. Sandra, then very young and inexperienced, did not want to wake up in the morning because what good could another day bring her? A terrible state of mind. She had never experienced anything like it before or since. Sandra's life hadn't been spoiled at all. She was born into a very poor family. Her mom worked as a cleaner. Her dad worked odd jobs wherever he could. Both of them were uneducated. They finished 9 grades and didn't go on to further studies. Then somehow they met and started living together. As far as Sandra knew, her parents weren't even married. The 3 of them lived in an old wooden building on the outskirts of town in a former barrack. The family had a small flat there, or rather, they rented it with their own corner. Sandra's father and mother never got their own place. They were both quite happy with that life. If one of the spouses managed to earn more money, there was a party with drinking, cheerful neighbors, dancing, talking until morning, and sometimes fights. On such days, Sandra bought cheap sweets from the nearest shop, stale gingerbread, chocolates with nuts, soda in tin cans. The little girl felt almost happy. But the truth is, fear always came afterwards. The drunken guests of her parents, many of them instilled fear in Sandra. Sometimes she even did not sleep at night, listening to the sounds in the kitchen. Until now, the girl thought that everyone lived the same way she did. Sandra did not go to kindergarten. From the age of 3, she was left alone at home while her parents worked or went for a walk somewhere. She even liked it. She could play wherever she wanted and make as much noise as she wanted. No one reprimanded her or calmed her down. Sandra had many friends in the yard. The girl knew them from birth. They were the children of the very neighbors with whom her parents were so closely associated. These boys and girls grew up just like Sandra herself. It was a rough neighborhood. That's how everyone lived. And then it was time to go to school. And it was there that Sandra realized how different her own life was from that of many other children. Her classmates had beautiful new bags and clean clothes. They brought beautiful toys to school, discussed computer games and trips to the sea. Sandra felt like she was in another world. At first, the children tried to stay away from the unkempt Sandra. The girl wore an old dress with worn orange shoulders, inherited from one of the neighbors. The little girl was very out of place, and Sandra herself was in no hurry to get close to her classmates, who were like aliens to her. But Sandra looked closely at these girls and boys. She understood a lot about this life by looking at them. and tried hard to fit in with this alien, but so attractive world. Sandra learned to keep her things and her workplace in order. Around her small desk there could be chaos, empty bottles, some rags, rubbish, but the desk itself was perfectly clean. The girl began to ask her parents for new things, albeit cheap, but from the shop, not from someone else's shoulder. Sometimes she even managed to persuade her parents to buy, and Sandra also tried very hard to study hard. True, with this was trouble. The girl honestly crammed all the rules in the textbook and memorized the formulas, but still made mistakes in words and examples. And physics and chemistry remained for her an incomprehensible science. Sandra was frustrated, but she didn't give up. She studied diligently and studied hard. Teachers saw it and praised her for her diligence. Even overestimated hard-working Sandra, encouraged as they could. But Sandra realized that she would not make a scientist, and so would like to become an economist or lawyer, to work in the office, to walk in a beautiful blouse and a narrow skirt, and be sure to wear high-heeled shoes. But the girl was very mature for her years and realistically looked at things. She knew that she would not reach university, but she would definitely get a specialized secondary education. Teachers helped the diligent student, drew her a good certificate. Thanks to this, Sandra entered college as a pastry chef. The profession seemed to her suitable, in demand, useful. "You'll never go hungry," her mother approved of her daughter's choice. Her father was gone by that time. He had died a year earlier from poor quality alcohol. Mother, by the way, also briefly survived the spouse. When Sandra was studying in the second year, her mother, drunk, fell asleep in the cold and froze to death. Sandra that night was preparing for exams because it was a winter session and did not suspect anything. She thought that her mother, as always, would stay the night where she was walking, but she decided to return home. So very young Sandra, who was barely 18 years old, was left alone. It was good to be an adult, or she would have had to go to an orphanage. Sandra suffered the death of her parents, no matter how they were, but still loved her, and in their own way took care of her daughter, never beat, never humiliated. And the fact that sometimes they were indifferent, so they themselves had such a childhood. No one had taught them how to bring up children properly. But the girl did not have to worry long. Life itself did not give. She now had to think about how to provide for herself. No, Sandra had been working a little bit by little for a long time. She cleaned the floors instead of her mother or her shift worker, or substituted for a saleswoman in a local shop for a few hours. But now Sandra needed a lot more money because she had to pay rent, take the bus to college every day, and eat. So Sandra got a job as an assistant in the school canteen. The job was hard in every sense. She had to carry heavy pots and pans from place to place all day long. After the shift, Sandra felt as exhausted as a lemon. And what was there to study for? Of course, the girl could not combine work and college. She was soon expelled. Sandra cried then from despair, injustice, and impossibility to change anything. Wow, she tried so hard to make it in the people, and in the end repeats the fate of her parents, also left without education. But Sandra will definitely not drink, and she will have a family of her own, with a caring, hard-working husband who will take care of her. Maybe she will have time to finish her studies. Who knows how life will turn out? Sandra dreamed of having a family. She was tired of living alone. She wanted to have a reliable man to rely on. But the local boys were not suitable for a life partner. They were firmly following in their parents' footsteps, and it was obvious. Looking at the peers with whom she grew up, Sandra wondered, do not they realize that they need to somehow get away from such a fate, at least try to fix something? But they didn't seem to see anything special in their way of life. Everything suited them. They felt quite happy, got together, had children and split up, had fun parties with fights and long conversations about nothing. Just like their parents. Sandra had been invited once, but she'd always refused. "Why are you ruining my reputation, you smart ass? You've got a bad temper, looking down on everyone," Cynthia, a neighborhood girl and once Sandra's closest friend, complained. Cynthia didn't work. Why should she? She already had a young son for whom she received a good amount of child support. I wish she had child support from the father. But the trouble was, he didn't work. Cynthia often invited Sandra to visit. The girl refused. She knew exactly what went on behind the flat doors, the same thing that had once happened in her own home. partying, meaningless conversations and fights. Sometimes Sandra wondered, I wonder why I turned out so different. Perhaps it would have been easier for her if she had turned out like everyone else. But no, Sandra longed for something different. She realized that she needed to move somewhere else first, otherwise she would never get out of this quagmire. But she was desperately short of money. And then Sandra met Scott by chance. The girl was returning from another shift, tired, could hardly move her legs. She sat down to rest on a bench, bought an ice cream. She spent the whole day in the canteen, where they had a terrible heat. I wanted to cool down at least a little. It was the middle of May, and the weather was quite summer-like. It was quiet, calm, and beautiful in the park. Dressed-up people were walking along the paths. Pleasant music was coming from the speakers. I didn't want to go home to my barracks. There were parties behind the wall, poverty and hopelessness all around. Those people in the park probably don't realize that there is another world out there. They think it's just as beautiful and clean everywhere else. Happy. Why are you sad? There was a voice. A young man sat down on the bench. He was pleasant, with an open smile, kind dark eyes, charming dimples on his cheeks, and slightly disheveled brown hair. I was walking in the park, not touching anyone, and then suddenly such an amazing phenomenon, a beautiful girl on a bench, alone, very beautiful and very sad. It's not right. Sandra smiled. A cute guy called her beautiful. Great. That even gave her goosebumps running down her back. Not at all like the greasy compliments of Sandra's neighbors. But what kind of beauty is she? She's just ordinary. Just ordinary. What's he doing here? Jason the stranger introduced himself. May I ask your name? I don't mean to be insolent or intrusive. Just so I can address you in some way. You don't mind, do you? Sandra. The girl smiled, a little embarrassed. She wondered what would happen next. Jason wasn't repulsive, he wasn't tense. On the contrary, he had a way about him. His smile was warm, kind, sincere. They sat on that bench for a long time, talking about everything, telling each other about themselves, and gradually growing closer, becoming almost kin. Jason, too, had been left without parents. He had been raised by his aunt, his maternal sister. He didn't know his father, and his mother had died when he was barely 5 years old. A very young woman was let down by a sick heart. So little Jason ended up in his aunt's family. She was not too happy about the extra mouth in the house, but did not put out. However, she could not surround her nephew with love and care. Jason understood this fact, and was grateful to his aunt for not sending him to an orphanage. It's better than growing up among strangers, he reasoned, but it's family, I guess. Sandra shook her head. Jason might be right, but his aunt was still too indifferent and aloof. Sandra's mother and father certainly loved her in their own way and cared for her daughter as best they could. Jason, it turns out, knew no parental affection or love at all. After completing 9th grade, Jason enrolled in technical school and began studying to be a welder, but never finished his training because he needed to work. Feeding an 18-year-old forehead wasn't something his aunt was going to do. I have raised you to adulthood. I have fulfilled my duty, decided this strict woman on the birthday of my nephew. Now be kind to start your own life, to move out. It's time for you to move out. So the guy had to hurriedly finish the driver's course and get a job at the base of the factory. Sandra even gasped when she heard that. How similar to her own story. She couldn't finish her studies either. That's why she had to support herself. She was just a little bit away from graduation, but she had to get a job. I'm grateful to my aunt for doing that, Jason smiled. But I'm only 20 now, and I'm a fully independent person. My peers are still on their parents' backs, and I'm my own boss. Jason rented a flat in a good neighborhood, and he managed to find a good job. He drove for the head of a big factory. The pay was pretty good. It was enough to live on, and even have some fun. Jason and Sandra had never been apart since that memorable evening. First they met, went on dates. The guy was always coming up with something new. They walked around the old city center, looking at unusual buildings, or sat in cafes. They would go to cafes, places the girl didn't even know existed, or something else. After only a month, Jason suggested that Sandra move in with him. She gladly accepted. Why, it's even more profitable to rent one flat instead of two. Besides, she had wanted to leave her barracks for a long time. Jason was kind, caring, sensitive. He was exactly the kind of man Sandra had always dreamed of having around. He could do everything: cook, make repairs, and handle money. Handy, responsible, economical. Most importantly, he loved Sandra very much. The girl felt it. Of course, she loved Jason too. And the young people felt really happy then. There were so many good things ahead of them. It seemed to both of them that they would succeed together. It was no coincidence that fate had brought together two people with such similar stories and the same outlook on life. Jason worked as a driver. Sandra continued to work in the school canteen. Now she would come home, happily buy something tasty on the way to make dinner for her lover, and wait for him to come home from work. They married a month after they started living together. That's how quickly things developed for them. They didn't have a big wedding. What's the point? No extra money. There were no relatives who would need all this festive action. It was better to buy something for the house. We celebrated together in a restaurant. We had a lovely time. Jason looked at Sandra with serious eyes and said he would do anything for their family. We'd be happy, we'd have children, and they'd be happy for us. I'd do anything, Sandra recalled. And Jason did try to keep that promise. He worked hard. He was given bonuses, which he put aside for future housing. The couple had a shared dream of getting their own flat, and they were on their way to it. Both, of course, realized that the fulfillment of this desire is still far away. But nothing, not all at once, slowly. Jason and Sandra decided not to rush into having children. Both thought that first they needed to earn their own corner. The couple wanted their baby to have a happy, carefree childhood. Not like theirs. But fate, as it seems, has a plan for everything. One day Sandra realized she was expecting a baby. She had a sort of epiphany one morning. It was too early to suspect anything, but Sandra was suddenly struck by the thought that a baby was already living and developing inside her. At first, Sandra waved away these conjectures. Then she took a test 2 stripes. There could be no doubt. Well, the mother-to-be was hardly surprised. She could feel everything. At that time, Sandra had no idea that at the same time a complete stranger to her, who would soon play a huge role in the life of their young family, was also rejoicing at the positive test. Jason was happy to hear the news, picked up the young wife Sandra in his arms and spun her around the room. The father-to-be hugged his beloved so tightly that it was even difficult for her to breathe. "Wow. I was afraid to tell you. I thought you would be upset," smiled Sandra, looking at the shining husband. "Why is that?" He was surprised. "Well, we wanted our own flat first to get on our feet, and then. We planned everything completely differently, but for some reason I'm incredibly happy." "This is the best news I've ever heard in my entire life," Jason agreed. Sandra smiled. Jason is so good. She was just now getting used to having someone like that around. The best, the nicest man on the whole planet. And he loves her. What a blessing it is. The young couple began to prepare for the arrival of an heir. Sandra was transferred to a lighter job. She was no longer allowed to carry pans and her salary was reduced. But Jason started taking part-time jobs. During the day he drove his boss around, and in the evenings he used a lorry to deliver materials to the sites. He did what he could to raise more money for the baby's birth. "Our baby should have everything we need and more," Jason said as he hugged Sandra after work. She felt sorry for her husband, seeing how tired he was. But what could she do? He was right. They had no one to help them. They had to do everything on their own. And it's not easy. Then came the long-awaited maternity leave. Sandra felt not very well and was glad to be able to at least a little rest before the appearance of her beloved daughter. The ultrasound had already shown that it would be a girl. The couple have even decided on a name. Jason said he wanted to name his daughter Emily. Sandra didn't mind. She liked the name too warm, so sweet. It was a late September evening. There was no sign of trouble. Jason had gone to his part-time job moving furniture from one town to another. He was glad to be able to bring an extra penny into the house, which of course was not really extra at all. The weather was good, the motorway was quiet. Jason was an experienced driver, despite his young age. Sandra was often anxious when her husband made long-distance journeys. But that evening she was not anxious at all. Sandra was lying on the couch with her laptop and picking out things for the baby girl to wear for her discharge. Yes, it's still a couple of months away. But while the parcel will be delivered, a lot of time will pass, she thought with a smile, looking at the tiny overalls and halters. Of course, the dresses were especially adorable. It turns out that even luxurious evening dresses are made for newborns. It was so nice to imagine my little girl in these clothes. I wonder who little Emily will look like. We won't know until 2 months from now. Jason and I are both cute. Emily's going to be a beauty either way. But that's not even the point, as long as she's healthy, Sandra thought. And then the phone rang. Sandra immediately felt something. She didn't feel like picking up the phone. A call in the evening, and from an unfamiliar number, not good. But there was no way out. Sandra Lucas' voice sounded excited. She recognized him immediately. It was Jason's partner, his colleague. It was Jason's partner, his colleague. Jason has crashed, the man's tone was worried. How? Sandra exhaled. She felt a sudden twinge in her stomach. He lost control on the motorway and went into a ditch. They took him to the regional hospital. Is he alive at least? I don't know anything. It was a terrible accident. I happened to be passing by, saw a familiar lorry, and then it happened right in front of me. Go to the regional hospital or call and find out. They took him there. I had time to ask the doctors. Sandra, having hastily changed her clothes, ran out of the house. The blood pounded in her temples, her legs shook, her heart clenched with an icy hand from anxiety. Just so long as I'm alive, just so long as I'm alive, she whispered without noticing it. Without thinking of safety, she stopped a hitchhiker. There was a guy behind the wheel. He looked anxiously at the pregnant young woman with terror-crazed eyes. Do you need help? He asked sympathetically. Is it time to go to the maternity hospital? No, to the regional hospital, Sandra asked. Will you bring me? Yes, of course. The young man did not ask unnecessary questions, and he did not take any money for the journey either. It was obvious that the guy sympathized and empathized with the passenger, but he didn't want to pry into her soul. However, he asked her a couple of times if she needed help. Sandra said no. How could this young man help her? The young man drove her to the gate of the regional hospital, wished her good luck and left, and Sandra rushed to the registrar's office to find out, finally, where her husband was and what happened to him. For a long time, she had to run between the buildings of a large regional hospital. No one knew anything. She was redirected from one department to another. Sandra was exhausted until she finally found the information she needed. Jason Brown, he's being operated on right now, the receptionist said, checking the notes in a thick notebook. He came in a few hours ago in a serious condition. Sandra exhaled with relief. Being in a serious condition. But he's alive. So the doctors got him to the hospital in time. It's in the hands of the surgeons now. What about him? What kind of injuries? She asked. And what are you, in fact, his wife? Yes, Sandra answered and mentally reproached herself for not having thought to bring her passport. But she had run out of the house in such a state that she had no time for that. Luckily, no documents were needed. The receptionist took her word for it. Wait for the operation to be completed. The surgeon will contact you afterwards. Just leave your phone number. Can I wait here? What's the point? The surgery could go on for hours. It's late. Go home. In your condition, you need to rest. There's nothing you can do for your husband here anyway. And yet Sandra stayed at the hospital until the end of the operation. She sat on the couch at the door of the surgical ward, praying to herself. She'd never done it before and didn't even think she knew how. Now the words themselves were popping up from somewhere in her subconscious. Leshka must survive. He just has to. How will she be without him, Sandra thought. The girl from the reception came up to her several times, brought her water, biscuits. At first she seemed so strict, so indifferent, But then she showed herself a sensitive and attentive person. She looked at Sandra with regret and said encouraging words. Even gave her a hug or two. This support made it a little easier. The operation took a long time. It ended in the morning. Sandra could not sleep a wink. How can you sleep when your heart is clenched with fear for the person you love? Finally, a tired surgeon came out into the corridor. Sandra, dying of fear, carefully looked at his face, trying to understand what news he was going to tell her. "The injuries are serious," said the surgeon. "We had to fight for the life of your husband. Pulled him, you might say, from the other side of the world. Now everything depends on the organism will cope or not. In any case, a few days will be critical. If he survives, he will have a long and difficult recovery." Sandra nodded her head. At that moment, she was not thinking about the difficulties ahead. The most important thing was that Jason survived. The surgeon was giving details of his injuries. His situation was very difficult indeed. What was he doing here? The doctor sighed sadly at the end of his monologue. He was so strong, handsome, strong. Now at best he will become an invalid, and that is if he survives. Oh, young people, you don't think with your heads. Sandra sighed. You can't explain to this man in a nutshell that Jason worked hard for their child, working multiple shifts, grabbing any part-time job he could get. He's got himself in a bind. Jason lost his guard on the motorway because he was tired. That's why he went into that ditch. Sandra stepped out onto the hospital porch after dawn. She hailed a taxi. At least she hadn't left her phone at home, although she could have in her condition. Then the phone vibrated again. Who would be calling this early? The man Jason worked for last night. "I know what happened," he said. "I understand your husband is in the hospital now?" "He's alive, I'm told. That's good." "But you understand me too," said the man on the other end of the line. "My lorry is beyond repair. The furniture is broken too. According to the contract, your husband is fully financially responsible, so please reimburse me for this damage. Even if not at once, even in installments, but..." "Yes, of course," Sandra whispered into the receiver and pressed the reset button. Only now she thought of other problems, money. Jason was the main earner in their family. He paid the rent and bought groceries. Sandra's income was barely enough to make ends meet. Everything else was on Jason's strong and reliable shoulders. So what now? Disaster. Where's the money for food and rent? I'll probably need medication too. Jason will need to be treated, rehabilitated. Where are we going to get the money? The debt on the lorry, the furniture, it must be a fortune. What about them? They don't even have anything to sell. And Emily will be born soon enough. Tears spurted from Sandra's eyes. She sank helplessly to the steps of the hospital porch. And then, immediately a searing pain pierced her stomach, so much so that Sandra's eyes went black. Then it seemed to go away, but a moment later it happened again. Sandra wrapped her arms around her stomach and froze on the porch. The pain came in waves. Sandra could no longer think about Jason or the money problems that their family was facing. Nothing mattered as long as the infernal pain went away. Sandra called for help with all her might. People in white coats, a gurney, the bright light of the lamp in the operating theater. Sandra was asked some questions. She answered, sometimes clearly out of order. Then someone put a mask over her face and asked her to count from 10 to 1. Sandra concentrated and started counting. Soon there was blissful darkness and calmness came. Sandra felt she was floating in something soft and gentle. Most importantly, the excruciating pain was gone. No thoughts, no worries, no fears. Just peace and quiet. Sandra was even a little upset when she opened her eyes and found herself in a bright hospital room. Her mouth was terribly dry. Her tongue felt like it was glued to her palate. An unpleasant sensation. Sandra was lying under an IV. Some wires were attached to her chest. The girl felt a strange lightness in her whole body. She grabbed her stomach. There was no stomach. How is this possible? Sandra had a cold sweat on her forehead from fear and anxiety. "Hello, anyone?" Sandra shouted with all her might, but her voice sounded quiet, barely audible. The patient was noticed, though. A woman in a white coat, either a doctor or a nurse, entered the room at her call. "Where is my baby?" Sandra asked the question on the answer to which her whole life depended. She had never felt such fear before. "Your baby girl is in the room for premature babies. She's alive." A hospital employee rushed to reassure the patient. "You went into premature labor out of nervousness. It's good that you were in the hospital at the time. You got help quickly." "Is she alive?" Sandra checked again. "Yes, she's alive. She's a good girl, strong, but she has to be raised in a hospital setting. She was premature. I've seen a lot of babies like that. This one's going to be fine. No, she's going to need rehab, of course, not without it. But the baby's not critical. Don't worry." Sandra nodded her head gratefully. The main thing was that Emily was alive. The young mother immediately believed the words of the woman in the white coat. Her daughter was really going to be all right. Ironically, the woman who later helped Sandra with the pram also had a baby that day. Also premature. But unlike Sandra, she had heard a very different prognosis from the doctors. Her baby was given no chance. Can I see my daughter?" "That's for later. You're too weak yourself right now. You've lost a lot of blood. And anyway, we all know what happened to your husband. Of course you're nervous about having a premature birth." "And my husband? Do you know if there's any news about him?" "I know he's alive in intensive care. That's all I know." An anxious days flowed, filled with fear for her daughter and husband. Injections, pills, painful procedures. Sandra felt her strength returning. That was a good thing, because she would need her strength. She will now have a disabled husband and a newborn daughter who requires intensive care due to prematurity. After all, money problems have not canceled. Can Sandra cope with all this alone? The nursing staff, knowing the story of the young mum, tried to support her in any way they could. They told her every day about Jason's condition. The man had already been moved out of intensive care. He even started to move his arms to speak and learned to sit up. But walking was much worse. All indications were that Jason would never get out of his wheelchair. Emily. Things were really good. She was growing, getting stronger, and most importantly, gaining weight. Sandra was taken to see her daughter on the third day after the baby girl was born. Emily lay in her cot, so small, so defenseless. Her tiny body was tangled with wires. And yet, compared to her peers, the girl looked the strongest. There were also babies who were born much earlier than they should have been. Emily was still 7 months in the womb. Sandra was soon released from the hospital, but the woman still came here every day to visit Emily and Jason and check on their condition with the doctors. Jason fought bravely. It hurt to see a young and once strong husband in a wheelchair. But he assured that he would get well soon and take up his work with renewed vigor. Because no more sickness and idleness, he looked at Emily's photos with a snowy smile. "I can't wait to get back on my feet and see my daughter. I'll carry her around the park on my shoulders and learn to braid her hair." Sandra smiled sadly. From what the doctor had told her, Jason was unlikely to get up. There was a chance, but it would take a lot of money to rehabilitate him. Where was that going to come from? Thank the doctors so much, she thought. They'd help Jason get disability quickly, which meant Social Security benefits and at least some free medical care. But all of that was not enough for Jason's full recovery. And then the owner of the truck called every day demanding money. Sandra even had to go back to work. Now she cleaned the entrances in the mornings and evenings. It was money, no matter what. She had plenty of time for now. Emily was in the hospital. Another month or so passed, and then Jason was released from the hospital. He came home in a wheelchair. It's a good thing they had ramps in their driveway, but it was inconvenient enough. Yes, it was hard for Jason to get used to his new situation, but he was not discouraged and supported Sandra, and he looked for a job, surfing the internet in search of income for people who couldn't walk. There were very few jobs. And then, finally, Emily was discharged. The joy of the young parents was unrivaled, despite the seemingly hopeless situation. Jason quickly learned how to manipulate the baby to bathe, feed, and change nappies. Seeing that the young father was doing quite well, Sandra decided to go to work. "We don't have enough money, and you can still cope with the baby at home. I'll go back to the canteen. There's no other way out. Jason had to agree. I could see for myself that it was very hard on him. He'd been the main breadwinner for so long, and now he was sitting on his wife's neck. But the young family really had no choice. They had to pay the rent, pay for food, pay off debt. The money that Jason had been saving for a couple of years for a future place to live had gone at a cosmic speed. Some of it went to medication, some of it to pay off the cost of the truck. It was a tough time. Sandra was at work 24 hours a day, working double shifts. Jason was doing the best he could at home. It wasn't easy for him either. Emily was growing up sickly, the effects of prematurity. She needed medicines, expensive vitamins, endless consultations and specialist examinations. Sandra was struggling. Jason, too, looked exhausted. He took part-time jobs earning pennies, but he couldn't do nothing either. Emily was all over him. Only the head of the family, Jason, didn't think it was enough. And still the money was woefully inadequate. Even a pram for Emily was not enough to buy, and she needed it to take her to the clinic. One evening, Sandra was coming home from work. Her back was already aching and her legs were buzzing with fatigue. Heavy thoughts were swarming in her head. This was not how Sandra had imagined married life. In her dreams, she saw herself strolling through the park with a pram and a smart baby in it. Sandra often looked at such young mothers. They are walking calm, peaceful, happy, and do not even realize how lucky they are. They are lucky that they can walk freely with their babies and devote all their time to them. Emily doesn't even have a pram. Suddenly, Sandra's attention was caught by a woman walking towards her with a lovely coffee-colored pram. Comfortable, maneuverable, obviously very expensive and high quality. Sandra had seen them in children's shops. They cost a fortune. Sandra gave the woman a habitual glance. Something about the stranger caught her eye. So stylish, well-groomed. Old, of course. But nowadays many people have their first child, especially the rich. It's fashionable. But why is this woman so sad? Maybe something happened in her life. Something terrible must have happened to her. There's no other way to explain that look in her eyes. After all, she seems to be doing well. She's so beautiful. She's rolling an expensive pram in front of her. There's probably a baby in it, dressed in brand-name clothes. The woman rolled the pram up to a car park with rubbish bins. The rubbish hadn't been emptied for a long time. A sort of spontaneous dump had formed here. Sandra thought that maybe the woman would throw the bag of rubbish away and move on. But the stranger did otherwise. She sighed, rocked the pram a few times, and walked away. With a quick step, the woman walked behind the house somewhere far away, and the pram stayed where it was. Sandra, not believing her eyes, hurried to the rubbish bins. The first thing she did was look in the pram. There was no one there. Sandra exhaled. She had already decided that some crazy person had thrown the baby into a rubbish bin. Such cases are sometimes described on the internet. But the pram, fortunately, turned out to be empty. Why would a stranger leave it here? She probably threw it away. People sometimes leave good things near the rubbish for people in need to pick up. Like this woman, her baby must be all grown up by now. So she got rid of her now unwanted pram. Yes, that was the most reasonable explanation. But Sandra tried not to rejoice just yet. What if the woman comes back now? What if she just left the pram here while she went to run errands or fetch the baby? Strange choice of location, sure, but I don't know. Half an hour passed. The woman still hadn't turned up. Sandra had been watching the pram all this time, because what if someone else took it? A thing like that wouldn't stay near the rubbish bins. And they need the pram so much for Emily, it's a must. In the end, Sandra is sure that the owner does not need the pram and calmly rolls it to her house. Jason even whistled in amazement when he saw it. This is how Emily is transported. And what a luxury vehicle it is. I'm surprised myself, Sandra smiled. The woman left it on the rubbish bin right in front of me and walked away. I was still waiting a long time, in case she came back. But no, she didn't come back. It's strange. Such a beautiful pram, obviously expensive. I could have sold it. I'd make a lot of money. It's in perfect condition, like new, Sandra agreed. Strange, like new indeed, Jason shook his head, examining the tires carefully. Oh well, you can't understand them rich people. Jason volunteered to wash the pram himself, which was why he had discovered the very letter. A piece of paper folded in half was in the side pocket of the pram. It was a whole message. "Come here," Jason called to his wife. She was playing with Emily at that moment. "It's just I can't believe it." Read it. Jason held out the sheet to his wife. "Where did you get this?" "It was lying in the pram. I don't even know how to respond to it. It's a terrific letter." Sandra took the piece of paper from her husband's hands and began to read. Beautiful, almost calligraphic handwriting, easy to read. It was clearly written by a very literate person. "What's the point?" "Yeah, Jason's right. It's a pretty unbelievable story." "Hello, people who found this letter," the message began. "If you're reading this, it means the prom has finally met its little master or mistress. That's just wonderful. My name is Tiffany. I decided to leave the pram near the bins so that it could go to people in need, people with a baby who don't have any money for baby transport. May the pram last a long time and help you raise your child. Of course, you are people with low income, perhaps even living on the edge of poverty. There are all sorts of situations. Why am I so sure of that? Simply because it's unlikely that someone from a wealthy family would pick up a pram in a landfill. Such people prepare for the arrival of a child in advance, make lists, choose things in children's shops. I was just as happy a while ago. But you're happier than I am, because you have the main thing: your child, your son or daughter. It is happiness to be parents, to see your baby growing, to give him love, to introduce him to the world. I don't know what could be better than that. Probably nothing, so you're much happier than I am. You're going through a hard time right now, but I'm sure you'll get through it. You'll be fine in the end. Let this wheelchair be a help to you on your start to success." It's like she's describing as Sandra said in amazement as she looked at Jason. "Exactly," agreed her husband. "That's what's so amazing about it. But go ahead and read on. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, especially at the end." Sandra delved into the reading again. "My life has been a fairy tale in which all my wishes have come true. Since I was a child, I have never been denied anything. My father is a successful businessman, my mother a successful financier. I was the only granddaughter of my mom and dad's grandparents. You can imagine how they spoiled me, how much love, care, and attention I received. They invested a lot in me, and I knew that the moment would come and I would pass it all on to my children. Since I was little, I dreamed of a big family, and in games with my girlfriends, I always took on the role of a mother with many children. Since childhood, I heard from everyone that I will be a great mother when the time comes. So I grew up with that thought. And then I grew up. It turned out that life is very bright, diverse, interesting. We traveled a lot with my parents, with friends. It's something completely different. In general, I had a happy student life. I had time to live abroad and visit different parts of the world. I had adventures. As they say, it will be something to remember in my old age. It was a very cheerful period of my life, bright, full of events. And then I got interested in playing on the stock exchange. Somehow it happened that I became a successful broker, though I never aspired to it. I thought I would get married and have children, as I dreamed. Someday I would start a family. But I didn't. Work took me over completely. The excitement, the success, the recognition of reputable financiers. I was invited to conduct seminars in major business centers. Business sharks listened to my words. It all made my head spin. I didn't notice how my priorities changed. Of course, sometimes I thought that it was time to get married and become a mom. Time is running out. But on the one hand, I was still young. On the other hand, there was no one I saw as my spouse. Maybe those were just excuses, because I was happy with the life I was leading. Because when I looked at my friends who were mired in childish affairs and problems, I rejoiced in my freedom. The once cheerful and energetic girls had turned into haggard women. They only talked about children and their skills. It made me sad. I felt like a queen. Successful, respected, indispensable. Famous economists sought my advice, magazines wrote about me. It's a feeling I can't describe. This glitter and tinsel overshadowed for me my main desire. I always wanted to have children. I wanted to take care of babies, to teach them something, to love them. But at that time, for some reason, I decided that motherhood is the fate of lazy, limited housewives. I even condemned women who were completely immersed in children, considered them too down to earth, not capable of anything but childbearing. I almost stopped talking to my family friends. Their children annoyed me. I don't know how it happened. What are you, a child-free? Lingered a question that one of my acquaintances once asked me. She had recently given birth to a son and could think of nothing but her child. I wondered. No, not a child-free person. It's just that at that time I didn't want to burden myself with all this. I mean, it's nice not to have to depend on anyone, to be free and easy. I wanted to go to the seaside with friends. I wanted to go clubbing or shopping. I wanted to start a new romance and plunge headlong into a beautiful relationship. It seemed to me that I would still have time to become a mother sometime in the future, after many years. For now, my life was bright and exciting as it was. And then somehow I got bored with it all. Work, risk, superficial novels, clubs, drinking, dancing, even traveling. I wanted a family warmth, a reliable person next to me. I guess the time had come. True, I was already 35 at the time. I remembered my old dream of becoming a mother of many children. Now I looked at my married friends not with contempt and regret, but almost with envy. I too wanted it all. Husband, children, family. Then came the realization that work and recognition will not replace the warmth of loved ones. Even tears came to my eyes at these thoughts. I grew up, I guess. And that's when I met Scott. A chance meeting at a coffee shop where we both had breakfast before work. We had what they call a spark. We looked at each other at first. Then he came over. Young lady, Scott said, "I can't take my eyes off you. You're incredibly beautiful, and your eyes are so amazing. I can see in them that you are a very kind, caring person." It was nice to receive such an exquisite compliment, especially from a man you liked at first sight. But I hastened to disappoint him. "You are not a very good judge of character," I said. "You don't know me at all, and you thought I was kind and good. I'm not." "You don't seem to know yourself very well," Scott smiled. "I'm a good judge of character, and I'm never wrong. You'll find that out." Then we got to talking. I was immediately interested in Scott. He was so smart, so perceptive, and most importantly, he looked at me with admiration and tenderness. That's how our relationship began. 6 months later, we were already celebrating a lavish wedding. He turned out to be the owner of a small dairy. What won me over most of all was his sense of humor. And a caring mother, of course. He finally made me feel like a woman in the full sense of the word. It turns out that it is very pleasant when you are looked after, when you are protected. Of course, we did not put off the question of heirs, as both of us were already at the age when it was time to become parents. Turns out he dreams of a large family, just as I once did around Scott. That childhood dream of mine came alive again. I realized that more than anything I wanted to be a mom, and as soon as possible. And that's when I found out it wasn't that simple. I couldn't get pregnant. For the first time in my life, I couldn't get what I wanted. It was discouraging. Scott told me not to worry. He told me about people he knew who hadn't become parents right away. But it didn't make me feel any better. I snapped at my husband, even though I loved him very much. He patiently endured all my tantrums. I still don't understand where he got so much strength. After a while, we went to the doctors. At first, they couldn't make a diagnosis for a long time. Scott and I were given a full examination. There were no problems with money, so we visited the most famous doctors both in our country and abroad. After a while, the doctors found the cause of the problem. It turned out that there was a subtle genetic breakdown in my health, which was almost impossible to detect. But also how to correct the situation, the doctors had no idea. If I had decided on motherhood earlier, everything would have worked out. But the years in my case played against me. I was immediately warned that the chances were practically nil, and then I enthusiastically joined the fight. I was not used to giving up and losing in anything. I took the doctor's words as a challenge. And again, treatment, examinations, endless analyses and procedures. I stopped working. I no longer enjoyed anything at all. I had a goal, and I was on my way to it. How can that be? My dream, and suddenly it doesn't come true. I just couldn't get my head around that. There was a period when I began to hate women with small children and pregnant women, just because I was so jealous of them. Why did they get it and I didn't? It's so unfair. Why are they better than me? I'd have been a much better mother. Cattle was so patient with me. He comforted me, supported me. My husband said many times that all he wanted was for me to come back the same old me, cheerful, kind, cheerful. I miss my Tiffany incredibly. It's been so long since I've been in touch with this intelligent, sensitive woman. Go find that woman, I replied resentfully. If your wife doesn't suit you anymore, why are you doing this? Scott sighed and hugged me. I just miss our old life. I'd love to help him, but I'm so fixated on what's unattainable for me. I've lost my mind. Let's adopt a baby, Scott urged. There are so many kids in orphanages who need parents. They've been betrayed from birth, abandoned and forsaken. We have a lot of opportunities. We'll give that child or those children everything they need to be happy. Think about it. Just think about it. He even showed me pictures of orphans from orphanages. Big-eyed babies, touching, defenseless, so in need of loving and caring adults by their side. But I didn't want to hear anything. I needed my own blood child. What do I need other people's children for? Their parents don't even want them. So what do we need them for? Imagine whose offspring end up in an orphanage. Lazy, alcoholics, don't be daft. We'll work it out in the end. But nothing worked out. Doctors were throwing up their hands and saying more and more often that genetic diagnoses were very difficult to work with. Treatment became more and more expensive and more difficult. The outlook was increasingly dim. I spent 5 years trying to have a baby. It was a very difficult time. There was hope and disappointment all over the place. I lived in anxiety, then in the pain of another failure. The cattle. How did he have so much patience? He was always there to support me, even though I was acting crazy. From time to time, my husband talked about having a foster baby, but I didn't want to hear anything. It was as if his persuasion spurred me on. Now, I also wanted to prove him wrong. We're having our own baby. Because I said so. He's offering me some nonsense. I've tried everything. I've tried innovative methods. I've tried folk medicine. I even went to a healer. The shaman was running around me, shouting strange words. I smoked all over the room. I smoked everything. But even then, I thought I was doing the right thing. Knocking on every door, taking every chance. Temporary blackout, no other way to put it. Scott looked at me with regret and concern. He was afraid for my condition, because I didn't look like myself at all. And then, finally, a miracle. One May morning, I learned that I was expecting a child. I was overjoyed. I even fainted from the abundance of emotions. I looked at the positive test and my legs were shaking. Finally. How I wanted at that moment to speed up time, to make this happy event come sooner. My long-awaited baby boy was born. There were still months ahead, but I already felt like his mother. The doctors were surprised at the time. According to them, there was no hope. But my case turned out to be a miracle. I naively believed that everything worked out because my desire was so strong and it changed the world and the order of things in it. And then I found myself almost omnipotent. The cattle, of course, were very happy too. I felt a kind of superiority over him. How he'd been going on and on about foster children. He had tried to reconcile me to our situation, and in the end, he was wrong. I was happy about that too. It's embarrassing to write that now. Readers, forgive me for describing everything in such detail here now. It is necessary, perhaps, to speak out. I want someone to know about my fate, to understand my feelings. Yes, read all the way to the end. Look, there's something very interesting and important waiting for you. I really want to help you and your baby, not only financially, but also with advice. My life. Make the right conclusions and do not repeat my mistakes. Appreciate what you have. Pregnancy was difficult from the very beginning. Constant threats of miscarriage. I didn't leave the hospital for months, sometimes weeks. I was lying in bed, not getting out of bed at all, taking care of my baby. My health was deteriorating sharply. Doctors offered me to get rid of the pregnancy, because the analyses said that the body could not cope with the load. My life was in danger. After all, I had a serious diagnosis that I could not give birth to. I didn't want to listen to anything. I had to dream of pregnancy for so long, waiting for this moment for so long, and suddenly giving up on a lined-up baby. No way. You are doctors and you are paid a lot of money to do your job, I shouted at the nursing staff. Then do it properly. It's only a few months away. It's the 21st century. Is medicine so powerless these days? My doctors used to say. Yes, you're right, doctors are gods. Are you suffering? The child suffers. The consequences could be catastrophic. There are no guarantees. You have to understand that. But I didn't want to hear any of it. By then I already knew I was carrying my son. I'd even dreamt about him many times. For the sake of this baby, I was ready to endure any pain and to lie in hospital, even for the whole 9 months. I needed a child, and that was it. The fact that the baby suffered in the womb, not adapted for carrying children, I did not even think about it. That's how selfish I was back then. Cattle, seeing that I could not change my mind, was there for me and just supported me. He didn't argue anymore, so as not to make me nervous. He agreed with everything, held my hand, reassured me, bought all the necessary drugs, talked to the doctors. Just a hug when I needed it. I was getting worse. I hoped that the baby was suffering less, but according to the ultrasound, it was also very, very bad. I was so scared for my baby boy. He was the meaning of my life. I was talking to my son, asking him to hang in there to distract myself somehow. I was surfing baby stuff websites, looking at prams, choosing clothes for my boy. It was such a pleasant hassle. We had parcels coming home to us, lots and lots of them. Looking at these things, I thought about good things because, well, here they are, the proof that Scott and I are almost parents. There's so much baby stuff in the house, we just have to wait for their little owner. He's going to be the happiest baby in the world. And the difficulties will be forgotten like a bad dream. The boy was born much prematurely. The doctor's manipulations didn't help. The organism decided to get rid of what was destroying my health and harming me. The baby turned out to be weak, sickly. I saw his thin arms and legs, some strange, bright skin color. My heart sank with pity and tenderness. Only looking at my son wrapped in wires, I realized that I was a complete egoist. The doctors had warned me this would happen. And now I'm much better. My health is recovering rapidly. The child is bad. He is all alone in the intensive care unit, fighting for his life. The doctors said right away that there was little hope. Congenital abnormalities, general weakness of the baby due to the fact that my pregnancy was hard. But I still believed in a miracle. I even threatened the doctors that if anything, they would retaliate. Of course, that didn't help. My son struggled for a few days, then gave up after all. When they told me that, my world turned upside down. I was so angry at everyone, blaming the doctors, even Scott. He, in my opinion, didn't have enough faith in the happy outcome, and therefore was to blame too. It got to the point where Scott put me in a clinic. Padded room, helpful staff. Talking to a therapist. Silence, rest, medication. I began to slowly come round, rethink things and realize things. I realized what had happened. Selfish people are fixated on what they want. I realized how badly I'd behaved towards Scott. I thought about the future. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I realized that I needed to channel my energy not into anger and hatred, but into creation. That's when the conversation with my husband came back to my mind. Scott was right. There are so many underprivileged children in the world. You have to help them. You have to support them. Just because you don't have a baby of your own doesn't mean you have no one to give your unsold love and care to. I returned home a different person. The cattle were the most excited about it. He said he missed the old Tiffany so much, and now she's back with him. It was really nice. Things that reminded me of the tragedy that had happened to us, which I had bought in myriad ways: clothes, toys, furniture. Cattle put them in a separate room, a kind of warehouse or museum. These things, looking at them, still pained me deeply. Let's throw it away, I said to my husband. Why? Wouldn't it be better to give them away to the needy, he wondered. The cattle, as always, were right. I started traveling to shelters with boxes and bags. There I got acquainted with the staff, learnt the stories of the children. Lots and lots of stories, complicated fates, tragedies, betrayals. Someday, when I have more time, I will write a book about it. People need to know this. It fascinated me. I wanted to help underprivileged kids, to make their lives a little better. And I could. I had all the opportunities, and now I think to organize my own charitable foundation. It's a lot of work, but I can do it. I've already started to learn a little bit about how to set it up. In the meantime, I help kids from orphanages, buying things they need and organizing holidays. I am so happy to see smiles on the faces of these boys and girls. Some time past, it seemed to me that I gave away all the things that I bought for my son, but one day I came across this pram. I remembered how carefully I chose it, studied the features, looked at the appearance. I wanted my son to be comfortable in it. But unfortunately, he never had time to try it out. The pram was stored in the basement. That's why Scott and I had forgotten about it. He tensed up when I noticed the thing, thinking I was going to get hurt again. But strangely enough, all I felt was a slight sadness. Regret, because I already had meaning in my life again. And I knew that my baby, what had happened to him, it wasn't all for nothing. Now, in honor of my son, I will help many other children. Our boy didn't live long, but his short life will make a huge difference in this world. But what about the pram? I had a very interesting idea about it. Orphanages where children have a hard life. Everyone knows about it. They often talk about it, but at least they are provided for, always fed and clothed. They lack parental love and care. At the same time, they are fully provided for financially. But there is another category of children. Their parents earn pennies and cannot buy them even the most necessary things. How many such families do we have? Usually nobody helps them. There are mom and dad, let them raise their heirs. That's what most people think. But there are different situations. Not only lazy and irresponsible people get into difficult situations. I decided to leave this pram where it will be found by people who need it badly. Usually good things that are no longer needed are left near the rubbish. That's what I did with the pram. Thank you for reading this story to the end. I hope my letter eventually found the right recipient. I believe it did. You must be desperate right now. You don't have enough money to live on. You don't see a future. So I want to help you with something else. Not far from the rubbish bins where you found the pram, there's an unfinished shop building, an abandoned property. I left something else under the porch there for you. I hope it will help you get your life together and raise your baby to be a decent human being. Good luck with everything. Tiffany. Sandra set the sheet aside in confusion and looked at Jason. Do you think this is all true? She asked Jason. You mean about something waiting for us under the porch of the unfinished building? And about that, too. And about the whole thing in general, she clarified. I don't know what to think, Jason shrugged. But I'm definitely going to look under the porch right now. I don't feel like waiting until morning. The young parents put Emily to bed. They waited until she was snoring sweetly in her cot before they went outside. They were not worried about their daughter. They knew that she now sleeps at least 4 hours in a row, and they do not need so much time. The unfinished building was very close. They could do it in 20 minutes. This is the place, Jason said as he wheeled his buggy up to the porch of the unfinished shop. He bent down and started fumbling under the porch with his hands. Sandra was standing nearby, afraid of something. She looked around, wondering if this was some kind of prank or worse. What if they were being set up? What if right now there was someone watching them from around the corner? Look, Jason exclaimed, pulling out a small roll frozen in cellophane. The boy immediately tore open the wrapping and whistled in surprise. Sandra looked at what he was holding out to her. It was a thick wad of note slots and lots of money. Sandra even pinched her hand to make sure it wasn't a dream. There was a fortune in here. Maybe not, the girl doubted. Yeah, no, it looks like the real thing, Jason said, examining the notes closely. So everything in this letter is true from the first to the last word. Unbelievable. Sandra still couldn't believe it, couldn't believe that strangers had saved their family from imminent disaster. But that's how it turned out in the end. The money was enough to rehabilitate Jason. The young man was quickly put back on his feet in a paid medical center. Now he could work again. It's true what they say, if you want to make a man happy, first take something away from him, and then give it back, Jason rejoiced. He was walking at last. It took a long time to learn how to do it. It didn't all work at once. Daddy and daughter took their first steps together. One from the moment of birth, the other after the accident. The young people also had enough to buy their own flat. A small two-bedroom in an unprestigious area of the city, but it was their own cozy native beloved. With what pleasure the young made repairs in their nest and arranged it. Yes, the money found under the porch was enough for the new place. Jason was working again, so the family was no longer in poverty. Sandra was able to finish her maternity leave in peace. Now she didn't have to work from dawn to dusk in the canteen. What a blessing it was to watch your child grow up, to introduce him to the world, to devote time to him without thinking about how to survive. Jason paid off his debt to his former employer and found a new job. Now he wasn't working multiple shifts and was much more careful and cautious than before. Life was getting better. One day Sandra was walking in the park with her pram, the same lovely coffee-colored pram. It was designed to be converted into a seated vehicle. In the pram, Emily, wearing a light white dress and a smart hat, wiggled her legs and looked at the world in wonder. She looked like a doll. And Sandra suddenly caught herself thinking that she was now that happy young mother, one of those she had once envied so much. And it was all thanks to Tiffany. A woman who had survived a tragedy, but had managed to overcome herself and find her true calling. Tiffany is probably now helping other orphans and poor children. It's wonderful that there are people like that in the world. As the years passed, Jason and Sandra worked, raising Emily. They weren't poor anymore, just an ordinary, middle-class family. Even managed to get away to the seaside once in a while, all thanks to the occasional help from complete strangers. Sandra tried to look for Tiffany, scouring the internet, looking at many pages on social networks. Why? But just wanted to say to the person who had done so much for their family's future. Thank you, just a simple thank you. Let Tiffany know that her pram and money really did save an entire family. It would probably make her feel good. But Sandra soon realized that Tiffany apparently lived in a different town altogether, because no one supervised the local shelters. And there was no children's aid fund in their town either. Some kind of fairy, Jason said. He, too, wanted to find their savior. She'd come out of nowhere at a difficult moment, and then vanished without a trace. It's mystical, our guardian angel, that's what it is. Years passed. Emily grew up to be a pretty girl. She always got excellent grades. Her parents were proud of their daughter and very much hoped that she, unlike them, will definitely be able to get a good education. They both encouraged Emily to go to university. The girl herself was not against it. Since the third grade, she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Of course, Emily knew the story of the pram. Her parents told their daughter about it when she was about 5 years old. Every day, Sandra remembered the woman who had left the expensive new pram near the rubbish bin. Her face was clearly etched in Sandra's memory. It was Tiffany, about whom she had just read the article. This was the amazing fairy who had helped their family out of poverty. Doubts, of course, still remained. So Sandra started looking for information about the accidental savior. She wanted to know for sure. There were plenty of articles on the internet about this woman. Her foundation had done a great job. 1,000 children had received great support over the years. Tiffany didn't just help children. She attracted the powerful to the cause. Famous actors, businessmen, they all participated. Tiffany repeatedly emphasized in interviews that she could never have done it alone. The world is not without kind people, she told a journalist with a smile. There are far more kind people than indifferent and callous ones. I know that for a fact now. Tiffany looked happy, full of vigor, content with life. Her shining eyes had nothing in common with the wan look of the woman Sandra remembered. It was understandable back then Tiffany, if that was her, was going through a tragedy. Now the woman had found herself and was dealing with an important and very responsible matter. Should I write her or not? Sandra said aloud. Too bad Jason is away on a business trip. I'd like to consult with him now. Sandra was used to discussing all important matters with her husband. The woman decided to find out a little more about Tiffany to see if it was worth bothering such a busy man. Tiffany had a busy and colorful life. She traveled extensively both across the country and around the world. Almost always with her were her foster children, now teenagers. So different from each other. What would their fate have been if they had stayed in the orphanage? And then Sandra came across an article that shattered all her doubts. because this interview was about her too, about Sandra. It was a long article with lots of pictures. Tiffany answered the questions thoroughly without skimming over the details. "Where did it all start?" a reporter asked. "How did you decide that your calling was to help underprivileged children?" "As I said earlier, it all started after Scott and I lost our son, a long-awaited, long-suffering child," Tiffany replied. "We had been preparing for his arrival. We had so much stuff left over. I thought that these toys, nappies, cradles could be of use to someone. Our son is gone, but we can't let all this stuff go to waste. We delivered bags and boxes to shelters. It is so logical to give unwanted children's things to orphanages. They will always be useful there. Then, when I thought that I had already got rid of all the things, I saw the very pram that I had so carefully chosen for my child. It was painful, I'll admit it. But by that time, I had learned to cope with my emotions and decided that I had to help some needy family, people who had a baby, but no money for new things for the baby. I had to find a special family. Any family would not suit me. For this purpose, I even traveled to neighboring towns, looking around. I thought I was abnormal myself, but still I continued this strange occupation. Perhaps the tragedy then confused my mind. Anyway, I have no regrets. Then one day I saw a sad girl. There was so much anxiety in her eyes. Visually, it was noticeable how the fragile shoulders of the girl were pressed with a heavy weight of problems. She was walking through the park next to a guy who was traveling in a wheelchair. It was probably her husband. The girl was holding a tiny infant in her arms, cradling the baby in her arms, and it was so beautiful. But she didn't seem to realize it. There was despair in her eyes. The young man in the wheelchair was cheerful, even smiling. But I could see he was on the edge too. I followed this family. I was very attracted to them. I walked a little behind them and listened to their conversation. The guy needed expensive treatment. As I understood, something had happened to him not so long ago, and he had moved into a wheelchair and lost his income. The girl worked tirelessly at a hard job. The child, as much as he could, was taken care of by her husband himself, a profound invalid. But most importantly, they talked about the wheelchair. Tiffany continued. About the wheelchair, the reporter interjected. Yes, about the wheelchair. That became a kind of sign for me. They dreamed of a pram for their baby. That way it would be easier for the man to take the infant to the clinic. And then something clicked in my head. I realized that this was the family I had to help. But a pram that was too little. These good kids couldn't climb out of poverty on their own. They needed help at the start, and I could give it to them. Not only could, but I wanted to, because, well, how could I not? I'm sure they did the right thing with the money. Money? The journalist didn't understand. Yes, I decided to give them not only the pram, but also an amount that should have been enough for the guy's treatment, and at least a small flat. But how to do it without arousing suspicion? I thought about it for a long time. And then the plan just sort of fell into place. Tiffany pulled herself away from the screen and smiled. Wow. She was now recognizing her story from the other side. It was so interesting, so fascinating and unusual. The woman pulled the very same letter out of the photo album. Of course, Sandra and Jason had kept the message. Tiffany had written it years ago. She so sincerely wanted to help a family in distress. I wrote the future owners of the pram a whole message on a sheet of paper on both sides. In it, I told them about my life, about the history of the pram. It was like psychotherapy for me. It was as if I was getting rid of, spilling out my pain and healing. At the end of the letter, I told this young couple where to look for money. I hoped that everything worked out well for them. I really wanted to know the fate of this family, and even went to that town on purpose, but I never met any of them in the park. Maybe they'd gone somewhere else. Or did we just miss each other? "We're really doing fine," Sandra whispered directly into the monitor. "Thanks to you, we're really doing fine." But why didn't you just give them the money? The journalist didn't understand. I can't remember now. I was in such a strange state at the time. Perhaps I didn't want these people to get tense or scared. After all, my story is not simple, and the situation itself could seem suspicious. In any case, I wanted to remain a mysterious stranger for this family, a kind fairy. but it's almost a legendary story. I'm sure it will be passed down in that family from generation to generation, almost like a fairy tale. A fairy tale, Sandra smiled. It is. Emily thought for a long time that they were actually helped by a fairy. It turns out the meeting wasn't a coincidence. Tiffany knew in advance that the pram and the money would go to them, and yet there were plenty of happy coincidences in this story. After all, Tiffany had come to their town looking for the right family. It was to their town that she had met them in the park, following them around. Surely they must have attracted attention then. A strange trio, a young, confused woman, a tiny infant, and a guy in a wheelchair. Tiffany spotted them, followed them. She heard bits and pieces of conversation between the couple and was strengthened in her decision to help them. Sandra didn't think any further. She was already writing a message to Tiffany. It was long, almost like that memorable letter from the pram. Sandra told the woman her story of poverty in detail. She mentioned the despair of the car accident, the disability of the sole breadwinner, the birth of her premature daughter, the huge debts. Tiffany needs to know that her help really did save an entire family. At the end, Sandra wrote about her life today and even attached photos of her family, including one from a seaside holiday. "There are no words to express our gratitude," was how Sandra ended her letter. The woman reread the message again and pressed the send button.